The shrill beep of an alarm pierces the morning quiet at exactly 7 o'clock. Oda stirs, his hand reaching for the phone as he contemplates the messy reality of his life. A love triangle that feels anything but grand. He finds himself drifting back to simpler times, remembering when he, Himawari, and Tsugumi were just three inseparable childhood friends, long before things became complicated. Returning to the present, the boy watches Himawari with a heavy heart, finally acknowledging the truth he carries. He is deeply in love with her. His gaze then shifts to see her sitting with Tsugumi, and the realization stings. He knows all too well that her heart belongs to his best friend, and that is the simple, painful end of the story. The morning classes eventually give way to the midday sun, and as the clock strikes 12:30, the school bell chimes loudly to signal the start of the lunch break. She suddenly appears at his side, full of energy and urging him to hurry so they don't lose their favorite spot. He hesitates, questioning if it's still appropriate for a boy and girl to eat lunch alone together now that they are in their third year of middle school, but she dismisses his worries with a playful laugh. The girl turns to him with a radiant, carefree smile, insisting that there is no reason to feel embarrassed. To her, their bond as childhood friends makes them special, placing them above the usual social expectations. They make their way to a quiet bench outdoors, and though he lets out a small sigh of resignation, he follows her lead, telling himself he simply has no other choice. He settles onto the wooden slats beside her, finally admitting the secret he keeps even from himself. Despite his outward reluctance, this shared moment is the part of the day he looks forward to most. His eyes remain fixed on her as she happily digs into her lunch, her face lighting up with joy over a sweet potato treat. Bathed in the warm glow of the sun, Himawari Senri looks more beautiful to him than ever, and he can't help but smile. He holds the word precious close to his heart, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they share. Sitting on the familiar park bench, he maintains a respectful distance from her, the quiet air between them filled with unspoken thoughts. She breaks the silence, her voice tinged with a playful, yet genuine frustration as she reminds him of the pact they made to always share their lunches and the walk home as a trio. Her expression softens into a more somber look as she reflects on how their third companion has been drifting away lately, often vanishing the moment others call for him, leaving her to wonder why he missed their ritual today. Suddenly, the very person she was lamenting appears with a boisterous apology, his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere as he approaches the bench where they sit. He laughs off his tardiness, admitting that while he tried to stay away, a meal simply doesn't taste the same unless the three childhood friends are together. Reaching into his bag, he announces that he has brought a peace offering to make up for his lateness, piquing their curiosity. He reveals a package of sunshine bread, a treat that carries the weight of their shared history and old-time sake. With a wide, infectious grin, he declares they will perform their traditional three-way split, a gesture that brings a spark of joy to her eyes while he watches with a faint, knowing smile. He expertly tears the soft bread into portions, handing the first piece to her as the familiar rhythm of their friendship restores itself. He watches as Himawari beams with delight, clutching her portion of the sunshine bread with sparkling eyes. Meanwhile, Oda passes a piece to him, ensuring everyone has their share of the nostalgic treat. As they eat, he compliments Oda on his precision, noting that he is the best at splitting the bread into 3 equal parts. Oda simply looks away, claiming he just does it randomly, though his focused expression suggests a much more deliberate effort. Watching the exchange, Himawari smiles inwardly, certain that Oda isn't as random as he claims. She is convinced he secretly ensures she always receives the largest piece. He reflects on his bond with Oda Tsurugi, his other precious childhood friend, who stands quietly beside them, a pillar of their small group. The lighthearted mood shifts slightly as he turns to Oda, his expression becoming more serious as he asks for some advice on a matter that has been weighing on him lately. He explains the situation, describing how he is practically abducted by other students every day at lunch, leading Oda to observe that his friend is being invited left and right by everyone in their year. Himawari watches them talk, a soft, knowing smile on her face as she accepts that Oda's reliable nature makes this kind of popularity inevitable. Indeed, Oda's reputation precedes him. He is the top-ranked student in exams, a standout in sports, and widely considered the most popular guy in school, though he remains humble about it. Suddenly, she lunges forward and grabs both of them, her face flushed with determination as she declares that despite his popularity, she wants to spend her lunch breaks with the 3 of them together, just like always. He looks at Oda, feeling a pang of inadequacy because his friend is simply too good a person to compete with, even as they discuss the best way to politely decline the other invitations and preserve their time together. He suggests that if their shared lunches are no longer an option, they must find a suitable alternative to maintain their bond. Continuing his thought, he acknowledges the difficulty of their schedules but proposes that they spend time together after school hours instead. The idea brings a bright, infectious smile to his face as he realizes that this new arrangement could actually work for everyone involved. As the suggestion hangs in the air, Oda glances toward Himawari, whose eyes shimmer with a sudden, hopeful light at the prospect. Despite the appeal of the plan, a new realization hits the group. This change means their usual walk home together would be sacrificed, a trade-off they must all weigh carefully. Taking charge of the situation, he stands and places a firm, trusting hand on Oda's shoulder, explicitly tasking him with looking after Himawari once the school day ends. The weight of this sudden responsibility leaves Oda wide-eyed and momentarily speechless, while his friend points out that they truly don't have any other viable choice. Himawari stammers out her agreement, her heart skipping a beat as the reality of spending dedicated one-on-one time with Oda begins to sink in. With a quiet, steady nod of acceptance, Oda commits to the task, prompting an enthusiastic and deeply blushing response from Himawari. He remains in a state of quiet shock, his face flushed as he reflects on how unexpectedly the day's events have shifted toward this new intimacy. He is walking with his usual companions when a cheerful voice rings out from behind, thanking a friend named Tsubaki for some recent advice. The source of the call is a trio of classmates who quickly catch up to the group, playfully chiding him for slipping away unnoticed. They seem genuinely relieved to have finally tracked him down amidst the school crowd. They explain how much they had hoped to spend the lunch hour in his company, expressing a bit of disappointment at his absence. He offers a gentle, apologetic smile in return, explaining that his long-standing routine of eating with his closest friends is a habit that has become second nature over the years. Seeking to make amends for the missed lunch, the boy in the group enthusiastically proposes a trip to karaoke after their classes end. The suggestion is met with immediate and vocal excitement from the two girls at his side, who are eager for the group outing. The boy lets out a boisterous laugh, confidently claiming that his singing will leave them all in awe, before heading off to gather the rest of their social circle for the outing. Observing this lively interaction, the girl with the light hair watches him with a soft, knowing smile. She reflects on how much he has changed. The boy who was once the smallest and most timid among their group has grown into someone who can handle himself with such remarkable composure in social situations. As the larger group eventually disperses and continues on their way, her attention remains anchored entirely on him, seemingly oblivious to anything else. He, meanwhile, is filled with a quiet sense of contentment. He realizes that for the journey home today, the usual group dynamic has shifted, and he will finally have her undivided presence all to himself. Now that the crowd has thinned and they are finally walking alone, he finds himself struggling to find the right words to break the silence. His posture is stiff as he tentatively calls out her name, his voice trailing off as he searches for a way to begin their private conversation. She blinks in surprise at his sudden bashfulness, her large eyes meeting his as a visible flush begins to creep across his face, betraying his inner nervousness. She walks beside him as they head home, the silence of the street punctuated only by their footsteps. Oda reflects on Tsugumi's perspective, realizing that their friend truly cherishes the bond the three of them share. Because of this shared bond, Tsugumi suggests that next time they should find something they can all split 3 ways. She lights up at the suggestion, her eyes wide with agreement, while Oda remains skeptical, privately doubting the brilliance of the idea. Moments later, she reaches out and gives his sleeve a gentle tug, catching him off guard. As they reach the point where their paths diverge, they bid Tsugumi farewell, promising to see him tomorrow. The girl offers a radiant, heartfelt smile, thanking their friend for the day they spent together. He, however, is suddenly overcome by a wave of internal turmoil, his expression darkening as he struggles with a rising tide of emotion. A profound realization strikes him. He is in love with her. This sudden clarity is accompanied by a fleeting, intense vision of holding her close, leaving him shaken and questioning his own impulses. In a sudden burst of panic, he turns and bolts away, shouting a frantic apology over his shoulder. He is consumed by the terrifying thought that something is fundamentally wrong and that he must take immediate action. The boy continues to run until his lungs burn, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He is haunted by the fear that his feelings are a threat to the delicate balance of their friendship. He fears that in one impulsive moment, he might completely destroy everything he holds dear. Finally coming to a halt, he sits slumped against a wall, his chest heaving as he stares into the distance, paralyzed by the uncertainty of what his next move should be. He stares into the distance, his mind heavy with a truth he has long tried to ignore. Despite knowing the reality of his situation for a great length of time, he admits to himself that he has spent far too long clinging to a fragile hope and intentionally looking away from the inevitable. Clenching his hand over his heart, he feels the physical weight of his decision. He realizes with a bitter certainty that he can never return to being the person he once was, and because of that, he believes he must find a different, more selfless path. Slumped on the floor of his room, the boy is a solitary figure against the stark, empty walls. He reaches a painful resolution. If he cannot be the one to make her happy, he will at least ensure the joy of the two people he cares for most by bringing them together. His expression hardens, a mix of deep-seated sorrow and grim determination etched into his features. He whispers to the silence of the room that this act of self-sacrifice is the only way to preserve what they have. The next morning, the sun rises over the school building as the birds chirp in the trees. Himawari arrives on the grounds, her eyes widening in surprise as she spots a familiar figure waiting for her near the entrance. She calls out a cheerful greeting to Tsugumi, noting how rare it is for him to be waiting for her so early in the morning. He responds with an uncharacteristic seriousness, telling her there is something important they need to discuss. While Oda watches them from the periphery, his gaze lingering on the pair. Standing apart from them, he observes the two people who mean the world to him. He reaffirms his silent vow, wanting nothing more than for them to find the happiness he believes he can no longer provide himself. Himawari is caught off guard by Tsugumi's sudden words. She stammers his name, her eyes wide with disbelief as she asks what he could possibly mean, while he seems equally taken aback by the intensity of her reaction. She feels her heart race, the possibility of a confession hanging heavy in the air as Oda remains a silent presence between them. He confirms her suspicions with a simple, quiet affirmation, asking if she truly understands the depth of his feelings. The weight of the admission leaves her completely flustered, her face burning as she struggles to process what this means for their friendship. Suddenly, the tension snaps as he bursts into boisterous laughter, revealing the whole thing was a playful jab. He begins to tease her, pointedly asking if her feelings for Oda have finally crossed the line into something more, leaving her reeling and dizzy from the sudden shift in tone. The laughter fades, replaced by a look of genuine sincerity as he calls her name softly. She is struck by a wave of realization as he explains his perspective, admitting that he has been observing the two of them from a close distance for a long time. To him, the bond they share and the feelings they harbor are so obvious that they hardly need to be spoken aloud. He reflects on their shared history, recalling a time when Oda was the smallest among them. Back then, the boy struggled with both his academics and his physical abilities, always trailing behind the rest of the group. Because of those early struggles, Oda pushed himself relentlessly to improve. He describes how the boy transformed into an impressive young man through sheer hard work, constantly striving for perfection because he felt his natural talents were never enough to keep up. She smiles warmly, moved by his deep understanding of their friend's character. She praises his perceptiveness, noting how he truly sees the heart of the people around him, while he looks back at her with a soft, contemplative expression. With a final, quiet look of hope, she seeks his validation, asking if the path they are taking is the right one. She takes a deep breath, her hands trembling as she grips her cardigan. With a sudden burst of resolve, she declares that she will finally say it, finding strength in the fact that she is sharing this moment with her longtime friend. Her voice rings out with a clarity she hasn't felt before as she confesses that she has always harbored deep feelings for Oda. Hearing this, he offers a soft, knowing smile, his expression filled with a quiet warmth as he simply affirms her confession. She looks up at him, her eyes shimmering with gratitude, and thanks him for listening to her heart. He nods, his gaze steady and supportive. He then makes a solemn vow, promising her that he will do everything in his power to ensure her feelings reach their destination. Later that day, the atmosphere shifts to the bustling school corridors where Tsubaki spots a familiar face approaching his classroom. The two boys meet in the hallway, with the energetic student noting how unusual it is for his friend to seek him out during the break. With a serious look, the dark-haired boy asks if they can eat lunch alone, explaining that he has already cleared it with his usual companion because there are matters of a more personal, masculine nature he needs to discuss. They eventually find a quiet spot on a campus bench, the silence between them stretching as they settle in. As they begin their meal, the spiky-haired boy finally voices his curiosity, asking what could be so important that it required a private meeting between just the two of them. He sits on the park bench, his expression unreadable as he broaches a delicate subject with his friend. This unexpected line of questioning leaves Tsubaki momentarily stunned, his eyes widening in sheer confusion. Recovering from the shock, the spiky-haired boy dismisses the idea as impossible, though his friend points out his popularity. He sighs, explaining that any romantic pursuit would require a level of consideration for their trio that he isn't prepared to give. Growing suspicious of the sudden interrogation, he demands to know why this topic has come up now, only to be met with a casual claim of simple curiosity. Looking away with a somber gaze, the dark-haired boy suggests that perhaps having a partner would actually simplify things for his friend. These words hang in the air, causing the other to fall into a heavy, contemplative silence as he searches for the meaning behind the suggestion. Suddenly, he snaps back, his voice rising with conviction as he declares his lack of interest, insisting that the bond between the three of them is the only thing that truly matters. When the dark-haired boy admits that a relationship would likely be a burden, his friend leans in with startling intensity, offering to handle any difficulties if it meant he would reconsider. The intensity of the moment becomes too much for Tsubaki, who shouts a frantic denial and bolts away, leaving his companion stunned. Left alone on the bench, he watches the retreating figure, his mind racing with the weight of what was just said, especially coming from someone like Tsubaki. A sudden gust of wind rustles the leaves above, echoing the turbulent realization of feelings that can no longer be ignored. The school stands quiet under the afternoon sun, but a hypothetical question lingers in the air. What would happen if Oda actually started dating someone? As he walks past, a group of girls watches him, noting that he has become something of an idol to everyone, making the idea of him being with just one person seem almost jealous-inducing. Later that evening, the trio walks together under the city lights, with Tsubaki casually remarking that as long as their group stays together, he doesn't mind the attention Oda receives. He had even gone so far as to discuss the matter with other classmates, who admitted they would welcome Oda finding someone, if only to prevent him from inadvertently capturing the hearts of every girl in school. Facing him on a park bench in the cool night air, Oda looks at his friend with a mix of confusion and suspicion, demanding to know what he is really trying to accomplish with all this meddling. The spiky-haired boy admits that while he once saw Oda as just an introverted childhood friend, the way others are now flocking to him has forced a change in perspective. Looking out over the quiet park, he confesses a deeper motive. He wants to take a long-held wish and finally make it a reality. He lets out a heavy, exhausted sigh, pressing a hand to his forehead as the weight of his own schemes and emotions seems to catch up with him. Seeing his friend's distress, Oda realizes the extent of the effort, noting that Tsubaki went out of his way to talk to all of his friends about his personal life. He then turns a serious gaze toward Oda, asking if he is truly prepared for the weight of the situation, before dropping the final, undeniable bombshell. Oda must have already noticed the depth of Himawari's feelings for him. He continues his confession, stating his desire for Oda and Himawari to be together. Oda stands silently, absorbing the weight of the words. His hands tremble as he grips Oda's jacket, the fabric bunching under the force of his internal struggle. Suddenly, he lunges forward, grabbing Oda's collar and demanding to know if he is truly okay with the prospect of them becoming a couple. The boy's eyes are wide with a mix of determination and hidden pain as he contemplates his two closest friends finding love with each other, questioning his own role in this unfolding drama. He stares intensely, wondering if there could possibly be a happier outcome than seeing the people he cares about most find happiness together, even if it leaves him on the sidelines. His intense gaze is met by Oda, who reaches out and firmly grasps his friend's arm. Oda questions if this self-sacrifice is truly what Tsubaki wants, expressing a deep desire for the three of them to remain an inseparable trio, fearing that a change in their dynamic would destroy the bond they currently share. He is met with a shout from the spiky-haired youth, who insists that even if they become a couple, he has no intention of losing their shared moments, like their daily lunches together. The sight of such desperation causes Oda to take a breath to steady his racing heart, realizing the depth of the commitment being asked of him. He is urged to stop worrying about his friend's feelings and instead focus entirely on Himawari, facing her heart with the honesty she deserves. Finally, a soft, understanding smile touches Oda's lips as he looks at the person who has always been by his side. He accepts the heavy responsibility being entrusted to him alone, promising to face the future with the same sincerity Tsubaki has shown. He sits quietly as Tsubaki leans in, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. Tsubaki insists that it must be him, acknowledging his own perceived weakness, and with a soft breath, he finally agrees to the path laid out before them. Because of this acceptance, Tsubaki's expression brightens with a determined resolve. He declares that if the person he trusts most in the world believes in him, then he will take the leap and do what needs to be done. Moments later, the conversation concludes as Tsubaki walks away into the evening, waving a hand over his shoulder. He calls out a farewell, promising to see him tomorrow, leaving his friend standing alone under the streetlights, watching his retreating figure. Meanwhile, back at the school, Himawari is a whirlwind of nervous energy, her face flushed as she realizes he has already departed. She frets over her own worth, wondering if someone like her could ever truly reach him after all this time. As the sun begins to set, he finds her and offers a gentle word of encouragement, urging her to move forward. She hesitates, her voice small as she mentions their mutual friend, but he reassures her that everything will be fine and that she should go on. In response, she looks down, her hands clutching her uniform as she absorbs his words. With a quiet, shaky breath, she finally finds the strength to agree, her resolve hardening. Turning away, she begins to walk down the corridor, but her gaze lingers on him for just a moment longer, a silent goodbye in her eyes. Suddenly, she spins back with a radiant, tearful smile that lights up her entire face. She shouts a heartfelt declaration of love and gratitude, her voice ringing with a newfound clarity as she thanks Tsubaki for everything. The young man stands frozen, watching her run toward the distance where their friend waits. His eyes are wide, reflecting a complex mix of emotions as the weight of her words settles over him in the fading light. As she disappears into the light of the courtyard, a silent confession echoes in the stillness of his heart, a quiet reciprocation of the love that has just been laid bare. He watched as her face flushed a deep, vibrant red, her eyes brimming with tears as she finally spoke the words she had held back for so long. From a distance, the sight of Himawari pouring her heart out to Tsubaki was unmistakable, her small frame trembling with the weight of her confession. In response, he listened with a gravity that surpassed anything seen in all their years together, his usual playful demeanor replaced by a profound, quiet respect. Meanwhile, Oda remained fixed to the spot, the silent observer unable to look away from the unfolding moment as the reality of the situation settled over him. The culmination of her courage resulted in a tender embrace, as she was drawn into a hug that sealed the bond they had finally acknowledged. He made sure to witness every second of it, a bittersweet smile touching his lips as he accepted the reality of her happiness, even if it meant his own heart would have to wait. Later that night, the silence of his room was broken only by muffled sobs as he lay face down on his bed, the weight of the day finally crushing his composure. Burying his face into the pillow to stifle the sound, he tried to convince himself that her joy was the only thing that truly mattered, even as tears soaked the fabric. A sudden, sharp resolve pierced through the darkness of his grief, a desperate internal cry that everything would be all right despite the ache in his chest. When the morning light finally filtered through the window, he sat up to the persistent drone of his alarm, his eyes heavy and dark from a night spent without a moment of true rest. He stared blankly at the device, wondering if he had managed to sleep at all, the weight of his exhaustion mirroring the heavy realization that some things, no matter how many times they are experienced, never get easier to bear. He reaches out, his finger trembling slightly as it makes contact with the cold glass of his smartphone. A quiet determination fuels the gesture, a silent vow that this attempt must be different from the ones that came before. His screen flickers to life, revealing a frozen moment from a happier past. 3 children dressed in summer yukatas, their smiles immortalized in a digital glow beneath the date of Wednesday, May 7th. The date itself seems to mock him, a recurring milestone that has appeared far too many times to be a mere coincidence. The digits of the clock are equally unyielding, marking 7 a.m., the precise moment his cycle begins anew. Sitting up in his bed, he stares at the device with a mixture of exhaustion and desperation, realizing with a sinking heart that this is now the 12th time he has awakened to this exact moment. His frustration boils over, and he slams his fist into the mattress, demanding to know how many more repetitions he must endure before he can finally steer events toward the conclusion he so desperately desires. His phone lies discarded on the sheets, its screen still broadcasting the same date and time that have defined his existence for what feels like an eternity. He is trapped, forced to relive this entire week over and over again, caught in a loop with no clear exit. The morning sun breaks through a soft, hazy sky, casting a gentle light over the start of another school day. Inside the classroom, the teacher reminds the students that despite just returning from a long break, midterms are already looming on the horizon, prompting a collective groan of dread from the class as others make their way through the school gates. As the morning routine continues, she begins taking attendance for May 7th, calling out names while the students respond with a routine acknowledgement in the quiet classroom. He sits at his desk, his voice barely a whisper as he acknowledges his presence, his eyes cast downward in a state of quiet contemplation. Memories of the past week, from May 7th to the 13th, flash through his mind, moments shared with his friends that now feel like a blur of recurring events. The weight of this realization settles on him. He has lived through this exact week countless times, trapped in a cycle that repeats over and over again. Looking out the window at the world outside, he admits to himself that he doesn't understand the reason for this temporal loop or why he is the one experiencing it. Even as he watches his classmates run on the track field, the sense of isolation grows, as he confesses his total lack of knowledge on how to escape this recurring prison of time. The school bell chimes, marking the passage of hours he has already seen, while he remains slumped at his desk, a prisoner to a clock that always leads back to the same beginning. He reflects on the persistent confusion that has gripped him since the very first loop, even as his companion urges him to keep pace and hurry along. As they walk, she takes his hand, reminding him of their long history of shared lunches since middle school and teasingly asking if the physical contact makes him feel self-conscious. He continues his internal monologue while navigating the school corridors, acknowledging that he is indeed repeating the same cycle of days and admitting to himself that he does feel a sense of embarrassment. Later, the two of them sit together on a park bench, a quiet moment where he remains lost in his own world while she hums contentedly beside him, enjoying her snack. His mind races with theories about a potential trigger that might end this endless repetition, so focused on his internal struggle that he barely registers her voice calling his name repeatedly. Suddenly, she leans in close, her face inches from his, catching him completely off guard and causing a flush of heat to rise to his cheeks as he stammers in surprise. Concerned by his distant behavior throughout the day, she presses him for an explanation, but he quickly deflects, claiming his distraction is merely due to Aoda's failure to show up. She settles back onto the bench, her gaze searching his as she questions if that is truly the only thing on his mind, while he maintains his defensive stance, insisting he isn't lying. Her expression softens into one of genuine worry as she insists on being there for him, refusing to let him suffer alone and offering to listen to whatever worries are weighing on his heart. The heavy atmosphere is abruptly broken when their friend finally arrives, clapping a hand on each of their shoulders and loudly questioning the strange, serious tension between them. He leans in, his voice full of boisterous energy as he questions how his friend knew to buy the sun bread specifically. Tsubaki, however, remains distant, his eyes hidden behind his heavy bangs as he dismisses the inquiry with a quiet, non-committal response, claiming it was nothing of importance. The energetic boy turns back toward the bench, laughing as he remarks that Tsubaki is always easy to read, while Himawari stammers in surprise, her face flushing as she realizes even Aoda noticed the gesture. She looks up with a soft, knowing expression, explaining her realization that the bread was intended as a peace offering because he expected to be late. It was a thoughtful gesture that clearly touches her deeply. With a bright, hopeful smile, she suggests that as an apology for the delay, they should all share the treat together, proposing they split it 3 ways to include everyone in the moment. He stops abruptly, his back turned to them, and speaks in a low, flat tone that cuts through her excitement, requesting that they simply share it between themselves today. Without another word, he begins to move away, the stiff collar of his uniform the only thing visible as he retreats into the isolation of his own thoughts. The sudden departure leaves his friends frozen in place. Himawari calls out his name in confusion, while Aoda can only stare, blindsided by the sudden shift in his friend's demeanor. He doesn't slow his pace, stating firmly that he intends to eat separately today, his voice carrying back to them as he creates a physical and emotional distance that neither of them understands. They are left in a state of stunned silence, their eyes wide with worry, while he maintains a cold, focused expression, his mind clearly fixed on a goal they cannot see. Finally, he disappears into the shadows of the school building, leaving the pair alone on the bench to wonder what has caused this sudden rift in their friendship. He is simply exhausted, the weight of his repetitive existence pressing down on his spirit until he can barely find the will to move. This weariness stems from countless failed attempts to change his fate, including the agonizing decision in a previous cycle to push his 2 closest friends into each other's arms. Yet even that sacrifice failed to break the cycle. As he kneels in the darkness, staring blankly at his phone, the realization sinks in that every effort has only increased his personal suffering, leaving the loop as unbreakable as ever. Standing isolated in a vast, empty void of his own making, he concludes that the only path left to preserve his sanity is total inaction. Back in the mundane reality of the classroom, the teacher praises him while returning a graded quiz, completely unaware of the boy's internal detachment from the world around him. He stares at the perfect score of 100 with a hollow gaze, knowing the achievement is meaningless since he has lived through this exact lesson 13 times before. With a sharp slide of the door, he exits the room and dismissively crushes the test paper in his hand, the sound of crumpling parchment echoing his growing frustration with the predictability of his life. Further down the hall, a heated exchange is already underway between his friends. She looks on with a mix of hurt and resolve while he stands with arms crossed, his expression hardening in defense. Coming upon the scene, he stops in his tracks, caught off guard by the unexpected tension between the two people he thought he knew perfectly. She presses the issue, demanding that her companion finally admit the truth, leaving the boy stunned and unable to find a response. He stands his ground, sweat beading on his forehead as he vehemently denies the accusations. He insists that he has no idea what is being discussed and shifts the blame back onto Himawari, his voice rising in a desperate attempt to deflect the pressure and confusion of the moment. As the tension in the hallway escalates, Tsubaki approaches the pair, his expression one of mild, detached confusion. He interrupts their heated exchange to ask why they are fighting, while other students, including a quiet girl with glasses, linger in the background to witness the sudden rift between the usually inseparable trio. In an instant, both of them whirl around to face him, their fingers extended in unison as they point directly at his chest. They shout that the issue is actually about him, their faces flushed with a mix of frustration and embarrassment that leaves Tsubaki momentarily stunned by the directness of their confrontation. The spiky-haired boy doesn't back down, leaning in close to Himawari with a fierce intensity. He accuses her of acting strangely specifically because of Tsubaki, his voice sharp with a realization that seems to have been simmering beneath the surface, while she looks on in stunned silence, her eyes wide with hurt and disbelief. Watching the drama unfold, Tsubaki reflects on how a simple errand during the lunch break could have spiraled so far out of control. He wonders if this friction was caused by their failure to eat lunch together, a small deviation from their usual routine that seems to have triggered an unexpected and volatile chain reaction among his friends. He watches as Aota sighs, running a hand through his messy hair as he tries to make sense of the situation. The boy acknowledges that while something significant must have happened, it doesn't explain why Tsubaki would suddenly distance himself from their group, leaving Himawari to look down at the floor in somber, quiet contemplation. A heavy silence falls over the dark-haired boy as he stares blankly ahead, his mind racing to connect the dots. He realizes that while Himawari's behavior was expected, Aota's reaction is the true anomaly, suggesting a deeper layer of conflict and awareness that he hadn't anticipated in any of his previous 13 loops. The two friends stand locked in a silent standoff, the air between them thick with unspoken grievances. Neither seems willing to back down, their postures stiff and their expressions guarded as the rift between them continues to widen right before Tsubaki's eyes. He lowers his gaze, a flicker of genuine sorrow crossing his usually stoic features. The weight of his own detachment begins to press down on him, as he sees the tangible pain and discord his decision to stop intervening has caused the people he once considered his closest companions. Ultimately, he decides to step away, urging them both to calm down before he turns his back on the scene. As he walks down the lonely hallway, the crushing realization takes hold. The chaos is entirely his fault, a direct consequence of his attempt to escape the cycle by running away from the very people who define it. He stands silently as the tension between his two closest friends reaches a breaking point. Himawari lashes out, accusing Aota of forcing his company on Tsubaki against his will. Aota snaps back, dismissing her claims as mere assumptions, but she persists, suggesting that Tsubaki's recent isolation is a direct result of Aota's new social circles and neglect. Seeing the rift widen, the boy finally breaks his silence, stepping between them with his head bowed low. He pleads for them to stop, his voice strained as he begs for their attention and for the fighting to cease. He continues, his eyes hidden behind his dark bangs as he takes the full weight of the conflict upon himself. He reasons that if his own attitude has been the cause of their discomfort, then he is the only one who should be held responsible for the friction between them. To seal his plea, he bends at the waist in a deep, formal bow of apology. He offers a sincere apology to both of them, hoping his humility can bridge the gap he inadvertently created. The gesture catches them off guard, momentarily silencing their anger. Aota clicks his tongue in frustration, his expression softening into one of guilt as he offers a quiet apology of his own, while Tsubaki remains still, his face a mask of somber resignation. Despite his efforts, the air remains thick with resentment. Aota decides to retreat for the moment, though Himawari makes it clear that the matter is far from settled, vowing not to forgive him until a proper admission of guilt and a real apology are made. With nothing left to say, they turn their backs on one another and walk away in opposite directions. He is left standing alone in the hallway, a solitary figure caught in the wake of their departure. A heavy sigh escapes him as the immediate pressure of the confrontation dissipates. Nearby, other students observe the scene from a distance, whispering amongst themselves with the optimistic belief that the trio will surely reconcile before long. He gazes out the window at the afternoon sky, trying to convince himself that the heat of the moment will fade. He clings to the hope that they will find their composure on the walk home, desperate to believe this fracture is only temporary. As the school clock ticks past 4, a lingering sense of regret hangs in the air. A soft, internal apology echoes for the boy who tried so hard to remain invisible, yet found himself at the very center of the storm. He stands quietly as the girl explains her stance, her voice trembling with a mix of resolve and sadness. She makes it clear that until their conflict is settled, she cannot bring herself to walk home with their mutual friend, leaving the air between them heavy with unspoken regret. Meanwhile, the spiky-haired youth marches away, his jaw set in stubborn defiance. Even when classmates approach him with cheerful invitations to walk together, wondering why he is alone, he brushes them off. His mind is consumed by the rift, and he declares that he will not offer forgiveness until she acknowledges her fault, leaving his peers behind. The weight of the fractured friendship finally becomes too much for him to bear. He stops in his tracks, a heavy sigh escaping his lips as he sinks to the ground, his spirit as weary as his footsteps. Looking down at the pavement, he is haunted by a single, agonizing question. How did everything fall apart so completely? Memories of better days flood his mind, back when the three of them were inseparable. They had shared countless walks and snacks, their bond seemingly unbreakable, a stark contrast to the cold silence that now divides them. He can't help but turn the blame inward, convinced that his own actions, or perhaps his lack of them, are the true catalyst for this sudden, painful distance between his two closest friends. Curled into a ball on the school grounds, he feels as though he's reached his breaking point, the emotional toll of the day's events threatening to overwhelm him entirely. Suddenly, a playful voice cuts through his despair from above. Leaning out of a second-story window, a girl with a knowing smile calls out to him, recognizing him as Agakuen and breaking his solitary morning with her sudden greeting. Before he can even process her presence, she leaps from the window with reckless abandon. He can only utter a startled sound as he watches in stunned silence, his breath catching as she descends rapidly toward the ground. She lands with the grace of a cat, her long hair fluttering as she stands before him with a mischievous glint in her eyes. Her sudden, dramatic arrival shifts the focus from his internal misery to the enigmatic girl now standing in his path. She lands gracefully, her long hair billowing behind her as she completes the daring leap. Tsubaki can only stare in stunned silence, his mind struggling to process the sudden arrival of this girl who seems to have dropped from the sky. Approaching him with an air of casual familiarity, she addresses him as Agakuen, correctly identifying him as the childhood friend of Aoda and Himawari. She notes that those two were fighting during the break, her sharp eyes having caught the tension between them that Tsubaki thought was private. She taps her temple thoughtfully, posing a question that strikes at the heart of Tsubaki's anxieties. Didn't those two start dating? Her tone is light, almost playful, yet the weight of her words is immense. This inquiry leaves him frozen, his wide eye reflecting a mixture of shock and growing suspicion. Leaning in closer, she continues her observation, suggesting that he has been playing the role of matchmaker for his two friends. Her proximity is bold, her smile suggesting she sees right through his efforts. He tries to find his voice, but only a fragmented syllable escapes his lips as he reels from her uncanny insight. The realization finally hits him with the force of a physical blow. This girl knows. She knows about the previous loop, a secret he thought he carried alone, and she stands before him now, a mysterious variable in a timeline he no longer understands. Heed sits in a dimly lit booth, humming a cheerful tune as she sips her drink. Outside the window, the city lights twinkle against the night sky. She continues, mentioning a rumor that he had acted as a matchmaker for their friends, questioning if they had finally begun dating. He watches her, his expression a mix of confusion and dawning realization. He stares at her, the truth hitting him with sudden clarity. She is just like him, possessing knowledge of events that shouldn't have happened yet. They sit in silence for a moment, the bustling atmosphere of the restaurant fading into the background. Noticing his intense gaze, she leans in with a mischievous glint in her eyes, teasingly suggesting that such a heated look might make her shy. She punctuates the remark with a playful, cat-like gesture. The boy immediately recoils, his hands waving frantically in front of him as he stammers out a desperate denial. He tries to steer the conversation away from his embarrassment, but she only responds with a knowing, soft giggle. Shaking his head to clear his thoughts, he finally asks the question that has been bothering him. Who exactly is she? She looks back at him, genuinely surprised that her identity remains a mystery to him. She pauses, a finger to her chin as she wonders aloud if she had simply been overestimating her own presence. He offers a quick apology, explaining that his social circle is small and he rarely interacts with students from other classes. Accepting this, she sets her glass down with a soft thud, suggesting they get to know each other for the sake of what is to come. She leans in with a playful wink, formally introducing herself as Keed Weshi from Class 3B. With a finger to her lip, she insists that he remember her name, her expression brimming with a mischievous confidence. Following her bold introduction, a heavy silence falls over their booth in the dimly lit cafe. While she remains poised and expectant, he sits across from her, his gaze fixed downward as he processes the sudden encounter. He realizes that her being in Class 3B explains her familiarity with him, as she shares a classroom with Himawari. As this connection clicks into place, she watches him intently, her sharp eyes never leaving his face. She lets out a soft, knowing chuckle before leaning back into the padded seat with a relaxed thud. Her smug grin suggests she is enjoying the effect her presence has on him. Breaking the brief quiet, she remarks that he truly is the oddball the school rumors describe. He can only respond with a look of utter confusion, questioning what she could possibly mean by such a reputation. She then shifts the conversation to her surname, noting that people often ask about the specific kanji used for Weshi. To clarify, she traces the characters on the surface before them, explaining the unique way her name is written. He finds himself thinking that her name sounds like something straight out of a storybook, though he quickly dismisses the thought as overly sentimental. His awkward demeanor betrays a growing sense of unease under her scrutiny. While he concludes that she likely isn't a malicious person, he finds her energy incredibly difficult to keep pace with. Suddenly, a sharp jolt of realization hits him, as if he's been caught in a private thought. She leans forward again, a playful yet piercing glint in her eyes as she asks if that was exactly what he was thinking. Her intuition is uncanny, leaving him momentarily paralyzed. She breaks into a soft giggle at his stunned reaction, clearly amused by his transparency. He remains frozen, clutching his drink as he wonders just how much this mysterious girl truly knows. She lets out a playful laugh, her eyes crinkling with amusement as she asks if her intuition hit the mark. Tsubaki can only stare back, speechless at how easily she peered into his thoughts. Seeing his hesitation, she encourages him to go ahead and ask his question, her tone light and teasing. He takes a nervous sip of his drink, his mind racing as he wonders if he is merely the target of a cruel joke. He finally finds his voice, offering a soft, sincere word of thanks that catches her off guard. Her expression softens, her sharp gaze momentarily replaced by genuine curiosity. The young woman's face lights up with a bright, warm smile as she admits that she finds his polite nature quite charming. She leans in slightly, noting that she appreciates people who lead with gratitude. Despite her friendly demeanor, he feels completely off balance, his usual composure shattered by her unpredictable energy. He grips his glass tightly, steeling himself to address the unsettling comment she made moments ago. She cuts through his hesitation with a direct, piercing question, asking if he possesses memories of a timeline where events unfolded differently. Her posture is relaxed, yet her eyes remain fixed on him, waiting for a confession. The weight of her words hits him like a physical blow, leaving him breathless as he realizes the depth of her knowledge. It becomes clear that she is aware of secrets he thought were his alone. Specifically, she knows the intimate detail that Sakura and Himawari began their relationship just 1 week ago, a fact that should be impossible for her to know in this current iteration of time. A startling realization dawns on him. She isn't just observant. She is a fellow traveler in this cycle of repetition. The possibility that she is looping through time just as he is changes everything. He looks at her with a newfound sense of hope, considering that if they are both trapped in this struggle, they might finally be able to find an exit by sharing their burdens. This loop, which had felt so lonely, suddenly feels like it might hold the key to his salvation. He lets out a weary groan, the weight of the revelation sinking in. Across from him, Key leans back, her tone surprisingly optimistic as she proposes that together, they might finally find a way to break free from this cycle. She taps her chin thoughtfully, clarifying that her knowledge isn't a perfect record but rather a collection of hazy impressions. To her, the past loops feel less like lived experiences and more like distant, flickering memories. The boy remains silent, his gaze fixed on her as he processes this distinction. The restaurant around them feels quiet, the gravity of their shared secret hanging heavy in the air. He blinks in surprise, a soft sound of confusion escaping him. The idea that her grasp on the timeline is so tenuous is a new variable he hadn't considered. Stuttering slightly, he presses for clarification, asking if she truly lacks a clear memory of the events involving the others. He admits that for him, the feeling of the previous loop was much more concrete. She offers a knowing, almost playful smile, her eyes glinting with a hint of mischief. She confirms that for her, it really is nothing more than a persistent, vague intuition. He looks away, his expression clouded with concern as he realizes the extent of her disorientation. It seems her entire experience of the phenomenon has been a blur of uncertainty. As she leans over the table, he begins to piece it together. She didn't approach him with all the answers, but rather to test her own theories. She only possesses fragments of the previous week and sought him out specifically to confirm if he shared the same burden. A heavy silence falls between them in the dimly lit booth. The world outside continues on, oblivious to the two students grappling with the mechanics of their fractured reality. He finally speaks, his voice low as he acknowledges the situation, but the moment is abruptly broken by a sharp clatter. Keed stands suddenly, her movement drawing his attention as she reacts to his somber realization. She leans in, her gaze sharp as she observes that his knowledge seems to far exceed a mere intuition. Tsubaki remains silent, his expression unreadable as he absorbs her pointed observation. The silence stretches between them, punctuated only by the sight of their drinks, one nearly drained to the ice, the other still full, as a heavy realization settles in. This iteration of events is fundamentally different from those that came before. Resting her chin on her hand, she continues her assessment, noting that while she may not be the key person capable of shattering the loop, she is still someone he can talk to, though she wonders if he is even paying attention. Despite the weight of their previous conversation, the school day continues, and her cheerful voice rings out across the campus, calling for him as the afternoon sun catches the windows of the main building. She bounds toward him with infectious energy, flashing a peace sign and insisting they go for tea again, her face lit up with a wide, triumphant grin that leaves him trailing behind in her wake. As they walk through the school corridors, he reflects on how she has become a constant, almost relentless presence in his life lately, leaving him to wonder if her sudden interest is genuine or driven by something else entirely. He attempts to draw a line, stating flatly that he has nothing left to discuss, but she is undeterred, stopping in her tracks to insist that she still has plenty to say to him. Her expression shifts, becoming intensely focused as she challenges him directly, asserting that he knows exactly what her so-called vague hunch is really about. The sudden intensity of her gaze catches him off guard, his eyes widening as she reaches out toward him, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. She then closes the distance, playfully hooking her arm through his and leaning in with a bright, knowing smile, seeking his confirmation as if they were the closest of friends. She continues to pull him along the school corridor, ignoring his protests as he insists he has already said enough. As they disappear around the corner, the hallway falls into a heavy, expectant silence. The sliding doors remain shut, leaving the space devoid of the tension that just swept through it. Watching from the safety of a nearby classroom, Himawari and Aoda observe the unusual sight, noting that it's rare for Tsubaki to be seen with anyone other than their small group. Without a word, he suddenly bolts down the hall, leaving Himawari calling out in confusion as he disappears from view. Later that evening, the scene shifts to a brightly lit family restaurant where the two students have settled into a booth. Leaning forward with her chin resting in her palms, Keed fixes him with a knowing gaze, questioning if his memories of the recurring events are clearer than hers. He sits across from her, clutching his glass as he weighs the risk of revealing the full truth of the time loops to someone who might not be ready to hear it. Seeing her playful, almost mischievous expression, he realizes that her fragmented memories make her unpredictable, and disclosing the details could be dangerous. He ultimately decides to remain cautious, resolving to keep his explanation as vague as possible to avoid further complications. He sits across from Keed in the quiet diner booth, listening as she begins to suggest they share a certain similarity, hinting at a connection beyond their current circumstances. Before she can finish, Aoda bursts into the space, his face contorted with frustration as he demands to know the meaning of her cryptic words. The sudden intrusion leaves the group in a tense standoff. Aoda glares with suspicion while the others look on in stunned silence, prompting him to question why they are even there together. He continues his tirade, recalling how their Monday afternoon had taken an unexpected turn and accusing them of meeting for tea every single day behind his back. Leaning in with an intense, searching gaze, the boy confronts his friend directly, asking if a secret romance has blossomed between him and Keed, catching the other completely off guard. He slams his hand onto the table in a fit of pique, declaring the situation to be completely unfair and messed up. With a look of genuine hurt in his eyes, he shouts that such secrecy is a betrayal, especially since he has always been right there by his friend's side. The weight of the accusation hangs in the air, leaving the dark-haired boy staring back in a state of utter bewilderment. A heavy silence descends upon the table as the two boys remain locked in the awkward aftermath of the outburst. Suddenly realizing the unintended implication of his words, Aoda recoils in embarrassment, his face flushing deep red as Keed leans forward, her curiosity piqued by his strange declaration. He continues his flustered defense, insisting that his bond with Tsubaki is merely a deep, long-standing friendship between men that shouldn't have been bypassed without his input. The other boy remains silent, his gaze fixed on his friend as he processes the outburst. Standing amidst the quiet hum of the diner, the spiky-haired youth remains tense while his companions remain seated, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Nearby, Himawari sits alone, her attention quietly fixed on the unfolding drama at the neighboring table. Because of this sudden intensity, a strange sensation begins to take hold of Tsubaki, a nagging thought that he can no longer ignore. He watches as his friend crosses his arms and looks away, a deep blush creeping across his face that betrays his outward bravado. It is in this moment of vulnerability that a long-held hunch finally solidifies into a startling realization. Memories of previous cycles flood back, recalling how the three of them always walked together, a perfect trio. He understands now that the reluctance to pursue a romance with Himawari wasn't out of a lack of affection, but a desperate desire to preserve the precious dynamic they all shared. Looking directly at his friend, Tsubaki tentatively voices his suspicion, asking if the truth is something far more personal than he ever imagined. In response, the other boy can only turn his head away, his silence speaking volumes as he struggles to maintain his composure. The sight of the boy looking so utterly defeated and flustered confirms the impossible truth that has been staring the young man in the face. The realization hits him with the force of a physical blow. His best friend is actually in love with him. Stunned by the sheer weight of this discovery, he can only stare at the boy before him, his mind racing as he tries to reconcile this new reality with everything he thought he knew about their bond. Tsubaki and Aoda sit on a bench outside the school building as the sun begins its descent. Aoda's eyes are wide with disbelief as he processes the revelation, shouting in shock as he struggles to comprehend the idea that his friend has been trapped in a repeating cycle of the same week. The dark-haired boy responds with a slow, heavy nod. He had resolved to share this burden with his closest friend before anyone else, and the weight of that decision hangs in the air between them. His initial shock turns into a mix of frustration and concern. He grumbles about being dragged away while Himawari was waiting, his voice rising as he tries to reconcile this impossible truth with their mundane reality. With a heavy sigh, he begins to connect the dots. He mutters to himself, realizing that this temporal anomaly explains the strange things his friend had blurted out recently. The quiet boy watches him, surprised by the lack of skepticism. He asks if his friend truly believes such a far-fetched story without doubt, but the other boy snaps back immediately, his expression fierce as he rejects the idea of doubting his friend's word. He continues, his tone softening but remaining firm. He explains that he knows his friend well enough to tell when he's being serious, and there is no way he would make a joke out of something so great. Touched by this unwavering loyalty, the boy can only utter his friend's name. The tension in his shoulders seems to ease slightly as the isolation of his secret begins to fade. Because of this shared understanding, his friend reaches out and firmly grips his arm. He sets aside the sentimentality to focus on the implications of the truth, ready to confront the reality of the repeating week. He leans in, placing a steadying hand on his friend's shoulder as he acknowledges the immense burden the other boy has been carrying alone. The weight of the revelation hangs between them, and the dark-haired boy can only stare back in stunned silence, his eyes wide with the shock of finally being understood. Continuing his firm stance, he insists that the attempts to orchestrate a romance between him and their mutual friend must stop immediately. He makes it clear that while he understands the desperation that led to such actions, they cannot continue. Because of this new understanding, he admits his own ignorance regarding the mechanics of the temporal cycle or any potential escape. Yet he validates the impossible choices his friend had to make just to keep moving forward. A gentle tap emphasizes his point, grounding the conversation in the physical reality of the moment. His expression softens but remains resolute, his gaze fixed on the boy before him as he prepares to speak from the heart. Standing tall, he declares that his only true desire is for his friend to find genuine happiness, a sentiment that leaves the other boy reeling from the sheer sincerity of the words. In response to this declaration, a profound realization dawns on the dark-haired youth. He finally perceives the true nature of his friend's devotion, recognizing it as something far more substantial and enduring than a mere fleeting crush. The blonde youth continues, explaining that his friend has always held the highest place of importance in his life, and he expresses a deep-seated wish to reciprocate that level of support and significance. As he stands before his seated companion, he credits the other with being the driving force that has always pushed him to advance, regardless of the circumstances. Finally, he delivers a definitive ultimatum. Unless a monumental shift occurs in their reality, he has no intention of pursuing a romantic relationship with the girl they both know, cementing his loyalty to the bond they share. His words from moments ago still echoed in the wind as the boy stood alone, contemplating the nature of the cycle they were forced to endure. He felt as though the world itself was spiraling, wondering if his own inability to move forward was the very thing keeping them trapped in this endless loop. The boy remained perfectly still even as a sudden downpour began to drench the silent street. He looked up into the gray sky, the rain masking his features as he questioned if the lack of resolution in his own heart was the reason the time refused to progress. The storm grew more violent, the sound of the falling water becoming a deafening roar that filled the empty space around him. Amidst the deluge, a girl walking nearby with an umbrella suddenly froze, her cheerful humming replaced by a gasp of shock as she spotted him standing unprotected in the rain. She hurried to his side, her voice filled with worry as she called out to him, breaking the trance he had fallen into. Her eyes fell upon his soaked clothes and shoes, and she demanded to know what had happened, unable to comprehend why he would let himself get so drenched without even trying to find cover. She listened as he admitted softly that he had been so deeply lost in his own thoughts that the arrival of the storm had completely escaped his notice. She immediately grabbed his arm with a firm grip, scolding him for his recklessness and insisting that they move before he caught a fever. As she pulled him along, he was left startled by her sudden, forceful care, realizing that his own passive nature was exactly why she felt the need to intervene. He is met with her unwavering gaze, her eyes burning with a mixture of frustration and deep concern as the rain continues to drench them both. Because of his visible distress, she declares that there is no way she could simply leave him alone while he wears such a pained expression. The girl then takes decisive action, grabbing his arm and pulling him forward despite his weak protests. Moments later, they arrive at his home, where she immediately begins searching through the cupboards with a sense of purpose while he stands awkwardly by the entrance. As she reaches for items on a high shelf, he realizes with a start that it has been quite some time since she last set foot in his apartment. Suddenly, a thick towel is tossed over his head, muffling his startled exclamation as she takes charge of the situation. She then commands him to go take a shower immediately, promising to have dry clothes and something warm to drink waiting for him when he finishes. While he heads toward the bathroom, he can't help but notice how she moves through the rooms with an effortless familiarity, as if she still knows every corner of the place by heart. After a short while, the sound of the door clicking shut signals the end of his shower, and he steps out feeling significantly more composed. He finds her in the kitchen, now wearing an apron and preparing a meal, her face lighting up with a warm smile as she asks if he is feeling better. She continues to tend to the stove, the steam from the simmering soup rising between them. When she asks for just a bit more time, he offers a quiet word of gratitude, acknowledging the effort she is putting in for his sake. As the ladle swirls through the broth, he remarks on how much she truly looks after him. She dismisses the comment with a playful, light-hearted exclamation, her movements energetic as she focuses on the meal. Her expression softens as she admits the depth of her worry when she found him earlier. To her, preparing this meal is the very least she can do to settle the unease that gripped her when she saw him in distress. She speaks with such sincerity that he can only offer another heartfelt thanks in return. The weight of her care seems to settle over him, grounding him in the quiet warmth of the kitchen. His heart swells as he takes in her radiant, blushing smile, filling him with a profound sense of happiness. In this moment of domestic peace, a simple, undeniable truth crystallizes in his mind. He loves her. Her back is turned as she returns to the bubbling pot, unaware of the deep reflection her selfless nature has sparked in him. To him, she has always been this kind of person, someone who gives of herself without hesitation. Breaking the silence, she asks if he is curious about the private conversation she shared with Auda earlier. He responds with immediate, firm dismissal, showing no interest in whatever secrets they might have discussed. She meets his gaze with a tender look, assuring him that her only concern in this moment is him. The world outside their shared space seems to fade, leaving only the connection between them. Standing at the counter, she remains focused on her task, her presence a constant, comforting fixture in his life. He notes how she has always maintained this nurturing role, regardless of the circumstances. She appears so small and fragile from this perspective as she continues her work. Despite her slight stature, the strength of her devotion leaves him in a state of quiet contemplation. She remains the picture of quiet resilience, her profile illuminated by a soft light as she sips from a small cup. To the observer watching her, she possesses an inner core of strength that feels almost blinding, a fundamental part of who she is. He, however, is consumed by a turbulent internal struggle, his hand gripping the fabric over his heart as if trying to contain the depth of his feelings. No matter the circumstances, he finds it impossible to cast aside these emotions, even with the painful realization that his love might never be reciprocated. Breaking the heavy silence, she turns with a bright, cheerful expression, ready to address him by his nickname and share a light-hearted moment. But the mood is instantly shattered when her foot loses its grip, sending her stumbling backward with a startled cry. He reacts with a sharp intake of breath, his voice full of sudden panic as he calls out her name. Without a second thought, he lunges forward, his arms outstretched in a desperate bid to break her fall. The impact is avoided as he catches her securely, the two of them ending up on the floor in a tangled, intimate embrace. She gasps, her face flushing a deep crimson as she realizes how closely he is holding her. Resting against him, she lets out a soft, shaky breath and gently tugs at his sleeve, her voice barely a whisper as she expresses her gratitude for his quick reflexes. Her eyes, wide and shimmering with a mixture of shock and a new, burgeoning realization, search for something in the air between them. Looking up at him with a bashful, uncertain gaze, she softly utters his name once more, the tension between them palpable. He gazes back down at the girl he treasures most, his expression softening into one of profound relief and quiet affection, simply grateful that she remains unharmed. He watches as a deep flush spreads across her cheeks, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning realization. The sudden intimacy of their position has left her momentarily speechless, her breath hitching as she tries to process the weight of his words. Because of this overwhelming sensation, she quickly buries her face in her hands, unable to meet his gaze. She stammers out a plea for him to stop, telling him that he shouldn't say such things while looking at her with that particular expression, her voice muffled by her palms. He remains close, his own face tinged with a soft blush as he listens to her soft protest. She calls him by his nickname, her voice trembling as she explains that his directness is more than she can handle in this moment. The intensity of her embarrassment is visible even from behind, where the tips of her ears have turned a vivid, burning red. She is completely overwhelmed, the physical manifestation of her flustered state betraying the depth of her feelings. Sensing her vulnerability, he gently asks if they can remain in this close embrace for just a while longer. She gives a small, hesitant nod of agreement, her voice barely a whisper as she concedes to the shared moment. He can't help but think how incredibly cute she is in this state, his heart swelling with affection. She, meanwhile, remains hidden, insisting that he keep his eyes away from her face while she tries to regain her composure. A wave of pure joy washes over him, a feeling so intense it almost feels dangerous. He realizes with a start that she is truly reacting to him, that he has the power to make her this flustered, and the happiness of that realization is almost too much to bear. Suddenly, a memory of Auda flashes through his mind, recalling the time his friend had gripped his uniform with desperate intensity. Auda had looked him in the eye, his voice thick with emotion as he declared that his only wish was for his friend to finally find happiness. The weight of that memory hits him with the force of a physical blow, his eyes widening as the pieces of his own heart begin to fall into place. The realization of what he truly wants, and what has been offered to him, stuns him into silence. As he looks down, his gaze softening, the truth finally takes hold. In that quiet moment of clarity, he understands that the happiness Auda wished for him is standing right here, and the realization changes everything. He has reached a point of no return, his gaze sharpening with a newfound resolve as he realizes his path is already set. This internal shift brings a heavy realization. If confronting his true emotions and embracing honesty is the key to breaking free from the endless cycle of the loop, then he must act. Sensing the change in his demeanor, she looks up at him with wide, questioning eyes, softly whispering his name as he prepares to speak. The young man offers a faint, bittersweet smile, admitting he had mistakenly believed she wanted to hide her face from him. Startled by his sudden closeness, she stammers in confusion, her hands trembling slightly as he continues to hold her near. She averts her gaze, her cheeks flushing a deep crimson as she confesses her own curiosity about the expression he was wearing in that moment. Looking at her, the girl he treasures above all others and has come to love so deeply, he feels the weight of his unspoken words. His hand rests firmly yet gently against her, the finality of his decision pulsing through him as he prepares to utter the words that will change everything. Embracing her fully, he makes a silent, solemn vow to himself. He is finally going to confess his feelings. Her eyes widen in silent anticipation, catching the intensity of the moment as the air between them grows thick with the weight of his impending declaration. She felt the weight of his resolve as he held her. Within his mind, a fierce determination took root. He was no longer content to be a bystander. He vowed to himself that he would redirect the gaze she had always reserved for Oda, forcing her to finally see him for who he truly was. As his declaration echoed in the silence of his heart, the world around them seemed to dissolve into a blinding, ethereal white. The physical reality of the school roof began to blur, replaced by a void of light and drifting fragments of memory. The blinding light intensified, the last remnants of the current moment fading away into a vast, snowy expanse of the unknown. The loop was shifting once more, leaving only the lingering echo of his desperate promise as the world vanished entirely. The two boys stand in the quiet courtyard behind the school, the silence of the afternoon air hanging heavy between them. Auda stares at his friend in disbelief, his eyes wide as the weight of the declaration sinks in. He repeats the words slowly, struggling to process that Tsubaki intends to confess his feelings to Himawari. The dark-haired boy maintains a steady gaze, explaining that his decision is a matter of personal principle. Aota, however, remains perplexed, scratching the back of his head as he wonders why his friend felt the need to seek his permission in the first place. As the wind stirs the branches above, he clarifies that it wasn't about permission, but rather a need for honesty between them. He continues, his expression hardening with a newfound resolve. He admits that to truly move forward, he must overcome the idealized image of Aota that Himawari holds in her heart. This declaration leaves Aota flustered and shouting in protest, but Tsubaki begins to walk away, his mind clearly set. He asserts that while it isn't a competition, he is determined to win her over, leaving Aota to acknowledge the challenge with a mix of frustration and respect. Overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment, the spiky-haired boy clutches his head in a fit of exasperation, shouting for the whole world to forget the awkwardness of the exchange. Despite his initial shock, he eventually steps forward and firmly grips Tsubaki's shoulder. With a sincere look in his eyes, he promises that if Tsubaki has truly made his choice, he will stand by him and offer his full support. He stands there, questioning why his friend is being so formal and stiff. Tsubaki, caught off guard by the sudden scrutiny, can only stammer out a confused inquiry as to why it matters. He looks on in confusion as the energetic boy points a finger, deciding to be blunt. Aota notes that while Tsubaki is usually the observant one, he seems too preoccupied to see the obvious, so he offers to lay the truth out for him. He then drops a bombshell that strikes at the heart of Tsubaki's secret, asking point-blank if he is currently caught in a time loop. His question leaves Tsubaki in a state of shock, eyes widening in sheer disbelief. The realization that his secret has been discovered leaves him breathless, managing only a faint, stunned gasp. He sees a gentle, knowing smile spread across his friend's face, offering a silent form of comfort instead of the judgment he might have feared. He is interrupted by the sudden chime of the school bell, signaling the start of the next period. As they begin to walk back toward the building, Aota casually remarks that having the ability to restart is essentially a cheat code, a powerful advantage to be used. They stop as he gives Tsubaki a reassuring pat on the shoulder, encouraging him not to overthink things. He frames the entire ordeal as a process of trial and error before waving a casual goodbye and heading off. He disappears into the distance, leaving Tsubaki to feel a wave of gratitude wash over him. Tsubaki begins to see the logic in his friend's words, realizing that this strange situation does indeed have its benefits. He turns toward the school, his pace steady and his mind clearing. The pressure to succeed immediately begins to lift, replaced by the understanding that even a failure isn't final. He looks up at the school building, finding a new sense of resolve. With the gift of time on his side, he knows he can simply refine his approach and try again until he gets it right. He walks alongside Himawari, the silence between them filled by her observation that Aota has gone off with his own friends. He concedes the point, acknowledging that they cannot expect to monopolize their friend's time indefinitely, even if a part of him wishes things could stay as they are. As they continue their stroll, she suggests that with different high schools on the horizon, they should begin adjusting to this new distance starting now. He responds with a simple, non-committal shrug, accepting the inevitable change with a quiet resignation. The quiet moment is shattered when Sakura approaches, casually inquiring if the two had been quarreling earlier, a question that leaves her visibly flustered and wide-eyed with shock. In a sudden burst of playful frustration, she begins pummeling him with light blows, scolding him for being an idiot while he offers a series of sheepish apologies, trying to calm her down. Once the commotion settles, a warm blush creeps onto her face as she reflects on the previous day, while he privately notes that the current mood between them is surprisingly pleasant despite the earlier chaos. He finds himself drifting into a memory of her reaction to him, questioning what kind of expression he must be wearing in this moment of quiet, shared connection. A flicker of determination ignites within him as he realizes that even if he lacks out his natural advantages, it doesn't mean his own efforts to reach her are destined for failure. She breaks the silence, her voice hesitant as she attempts to bring up the events of the previous day, her gaze fixed on him with a mix of uncertainty and expectation. His mind races with the possibilities afforded by his unique circumstances, concluding that the ability to loop back and try again is the ultimate advantage he needs to succeed. Driven by this sudden surge of resolve, he lunges forward and firmly grasps her shoulders, calling out her name and leaving her startled and breathless by his uncharacteristic boldness. He stands before her, his expression uncharacteristically firm and focused, the silence between them heavy with unspoken intent. She gazes back at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and a dawning realization that the atmosphere has shifted completely. As he maintains his grip on her shoulders, she softly notes that he is making the same pained expression he had the day before, but he quickly denies it, his voice steady despite the tension. The girl tries to protest, her face flushing a deep crimson as she struggles to find the right words to counter his intensity. His fingers tighten their hold on her uniform, a silent resolve hardening within him as he decides to cast aside his fears of failure and simply take the leap. Taking a sharp breath, he finally breaks the silence, calling her name with a desperation that demands her full attention. With a sudden, passionate outburst, he confesses that he has always harbored feelings for her, pleading with her to enter into a relationship with him. The shock of his words leaves her breathless, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears as the weight of his confession sinks in. He watches her intently, his own heart racing as he searches her face for any sign of a response, the world around them seemingly frozen in this pivotal moment. While she stammers and searches for an answer, a flicker of hope ignites within him, wondering if his bold gamble might actually succeed on his very first attempt in this loop. He stands frozen as the words he dreaded most spill from her lips. Himawari, her face flushed and eyes brimming with tears, can barely choke out her apology, her voice trembling with a weight of regret that hangs heavy in the air. A heavy silence descends upon the quiet street, stretching between them like an unbridgeable chasm. Neither moves, the only sound the distant rustle of leaves as they stand in the shadow of the garden wall, the weight of her unspoken rejection pressing down on them both. The young man can only stare in stunned disbelief, his mind racing to process the sudden shift. A single, sharp word of confusion escapes him as he tries to reconcile her tears with the rejection he just felt. She continues to sob, her head bowed as she repeats her apologies over and over. The intensity of her distress is palpable, her face contorted with a mix of guilt and a sorrow that seems to go deeper than a simple refusal of his feelings. Desperate to clarify, she quickly adds that her feelings aren't born of dislike or hatred. She confesses that hearing about his long-standing affection actually brought her joy, leaving him even more bewildered as he stammers out a question, unable to grasp the contradiction in her words. He steps forward, his frustration mounting as he demands to know why. If she doesn't hate him and is happy about his feelings, she won't simply say yes. She remains hunched over, her gaze fixed on the ground, unable to meet his eyes as the tension between them reaches a breaking point. His hand clenches into a tight fist at his side, a physical manifestation of the genuine confusion swirling within him. This wasn't a calculated move or a part of some grander strategy for a future attempt. He simply found himself unable to retreat from the raw honesty of the moment. Driven by a sudden, sharp realization, he blurts out the question that has been simmering beneath the surface. He asks if her hesitation is because of Aura, his voice cracking with the intensity of his need to understand the true obstacle standing between them. The question strikes her with visible force, her eyes widening as the name hangs in the air. The sudden shift in her expression suggests that he has touched upon a truth she wasn't prepared to confront so openly. A soft, knowing smile touches her lips even as her face remains flushed with embarrassment. She looks up at him, her gaze softening as she acknowledges that he has seen through her, quietly asking if he had noticed her feelings for their mutual friend all along. She continues her confession, admitting that despite their long history, she had been so preoccupied with her own world that she failed to see the depth of his emotions. Tears begin to well in her eyes as she insists that the fault lies with her, unable to forgive her own lack of perception. Memories of their shared past flicker through their minds, moments of childhood innocence and constant companionship that now feel heavy with unspoken truths. A few droplets fall to the pavement as she confesses that she never truly looked him in the eye or acknowledged the reality of his heart. With a voice trembling from the weight of her realization, she explains that this fundamental disconnect is the reason she cannot accept his feelings and become his girlfriend. Suddenly, she turns and bolts away, her final words trailing behind her as she shouts that this conviction has always been buried deep within her. The distance between them grows rapidly as she disappears down the quiet street, leaving him standing alone in the fading light. He remains frozen, his hand reaching out slightly as if to catch a ghost, his expression one of profound shock. In the silence that follows, a crushing sense of defeat washes over him, leaving his mind blank and his spirit reeling from the rejection. Finally, he strikes his own cheeks with both hands, a sharp sting to snap himself back to reality. He knows he must endure her avoidance for the remainder of this cycle and prepare for the next opportunity. He considers the possibility of returning to the 7th, hoping to undo the mistakes of the previous loop. He is roused from sleep by the persistent beep of his alarm. Fumbling for his phone, his movements are heavy with the lingering weight of the previous loop. He feels a wave of hope surge within him as he checks the time. Having dreaded mornings like this before, the realization that he has successfully returned fills him with a newfound purpose. He can finally try again with Himawari. He finds that hope is short-lived, however. His eyes widen in shock as he stares at the screen, a confused murmur escaping his lips. His hand trembles slightly, the phone nearly slipping from his fingers as the reality of the situation begins to sink in. He stares at the screen, which displays a date he didn't expect, Wednesday, May 14th, at 7 a.m. Below the digital clock, a photo of 3 young children in yukatas serves as a bitter reminder of a past he thought he understood. His eyes fixate on the date, May 14th, confirming he hasn't gone back to the 7th at all. He notes the time is exactly 7 in the morning, realizing the loop has placed him much further ahead than he anticipated. The morning sun rises over the apartment complex, accompanied by the gentle chirping of birds. He walks along the quiet street, his footsteps echoing softly against the pavement as he glances back at the building he just left. As he continues his solitary walk, a heavy sigh escapes his lips. He reflects on the long-desired escape from a repetitive cycle, yet a nagging question lingers in his mind, casting a shadow over his newfound freedom. Memories of a recent Wednesday morning at 7 o'clock flood back, vivid and painful. He recalls the sight of her trembling, her voice thick with tears as she repeatedly apologized for the situation they found themselves in. Shaking off the memory, he tries to convince himself that he is safe for the moment, though the thought of facing her again fills him with a sense of profound shame and avoidance. His internal monologue is abruptly cut short when he rounds a corner and finds her standing right there. Their eyes meet in a moment of mutual, heart-stopping shock, the air between them suddenly thick with tension. Before he can utter a word, she bolts past him in a frantic blur, her cries of apology trailing behind her like a physical weight as she disappears into the distance. He stands frozen in place, watching her retreat, the realization dawning on him that her thoughts and fears mirror his own perfectly. Clenching the strap of his bag, he is consumed by a paralyzing uncertainty, his mind racing with questions about what he could possibly do to mend the fractured reality they both inhabit. He stands at the entrance of classroom 3A, his head turning sharply as a voice calls out his name. Upon entering, he is met by Tsubaki and another student who inform him that the person he seeks is absent. He offers a quiet, hesitant thanks, his expression clouded with a growing sense of unease. Despite his persistence, returning to the classroom door time and again, he finds only empty space where he hoped to find a connection. The hallway becomes a repetitive cycle of disappointment. He reflects on the distance growing between them, suspecting that his previous confession has driven her away out of a misplaced sense of consideration. Yet, despite the isolation, a singular, stubborn desire remains. He needs to speak with her. Moving through the school corridors, he suddenly freezes near classroom 3B, his eyes widening as he spots a familiar group of students ahead. Desperate to remain unseen by Himawari, he quickly approaches the group, hoping to blend into the background while seeking a specific ally. He singles out one of the girls, requesting that she call for Keed Weshaba. A realization strikes him. If Keed is the person he remembers, her perspective on their shared history might be the key he needs. The girl, Keed, turns toward him with a look of mild surprise, her long, wavy hair catching the light as she addresses him by a familiar nickname. Recognizing him as a childhood friend, he attempts to bridge the gap by mentioning the multiple times they shared tea during the previous week, searching her face for any flicker of recognition. She meets his gaze with genuine confusion, tilting her head as she points out that this is, in fact, the very first time they have ever spoken. The silence that follows is heavy with the weight of a reality that no longer aligns. She stands there, seemingly oblivious to the internal crisis he is weathering as he stares at the floor, unable to make sense of why the world has diverged so sharply from his expectations. The girl politely requests to return to her lunch, prompting him to stammer out a hasty apology as she turns away, leaving him alone in the hallway to grapple with his confusion. He is left reeling, his breath hitching as he desperately searches for an explanation for how his reality has fractured so completely. Shaking his head to clear the intrusive thoughts, he wonders if she is trapped in a different cycle of time altogether, one that excludes their shared history. He reflects on the harsh truth of this timeline. His confession to the girl with the ribbon resulted only in a painful rejection, a stark contrast to the connection he thought they had. Standing in the oppressive silence of the school corridor, he realizes the depth of his isolation, feeling as though he is sinking into a situation he can no longer control. The thought of his friends drifting apart weighs heavily on him, as the looming shadow of their future academic paths threatens to sever their remaining bonds. His hand tightens into a white-knuckled fist just as the school bell chimes, its sharp ring cutting through his internal monologue. Despite the evidence, he finds himself unable to truly accept the finality of the rejection he received from the girl he cares for, the weight of it pressing down on his shoulders. Driven by a sudden surge of resolve, he bolts down the hallway, determined to confront his rival even if the cycle of time has truly been broken. He declares his resolve with a shout, vowing to charge in and break through the barriers as many times as necessary to change this reality. The boy sprints down the sterile school corridor, his footsteps echoing against the linoleum as he chases a hope that seems to be slipping further away with every stride. Despite his newfound determination, the harsh reality of the situation remains unchanged as he stands before her in the quiet, shadowed schoolyard. She looks up at him with tear-filled eyes, her voice trembling as she offers a desperate apology, while he can only call out her name in stunned disbelief. No matter how many times he pours his heart out in confession, the result is always the same. He is forced to watch her walk away, leaving him alone in the park as the evening shadows lengthen. The more he clings to the hope of a shared future, the more pathetic he feels, hunched over in frustration and demanding to know why his efforts refuse to bear fruit. She sobs, her breath hitching as she tries to explain that his persistence is causing a painful misunderstanding, her face contorted with the agony of having to reject him over and over. A cold realization finally washes over him. His desperation isn't winning her over, it's only causing her more suffering, and he is the source of her tears. Days pass in a blur of isolation, and he sits motionless at his desk in classroom 3C, his presence a dark cloud that his classmates observe with growing unease. As he feels himself being backed into a corner of absolute despair, his friend approaches with concern, but he quickly masks his internal collapse, claiming that nothing is wrong. He finds himself trapped in a mental prison, weighing two equally agonizing options. Living in this current timeline feels like a slow descent into misery, yet returning to the repetitive cycle of the loop offers its own brand of torment. His hand strikes the surface before him with a sharp clatter as the weight of his indecision boils over. This realization sparks a desperate resolve within Oda, and he decides that returning to the seventh is the only path forward. He strides through the corridor, his eyes narrowing with a newfound, albeit grim, purpose. He finds his expression softening for a fleeting moment at the thought of her, Himawari. If he can just make it back to that specific day, the burden of his failed confession will be erased, granting him a chance to undo the damage he has caused. As Oda wanders the quiet school halls, a practical problem begins to gnaw at him. The mechanism of his return remains a mystery. He watches other students pass by, living their linear lives, while he searches for a way to shatter the flow of time itself. He reasons that since the rules of this phenomenon are unknown to him, he must consider the possibility of trial and error. He stares at the empty stairwell, his mind racing through every desperate theory he can conjure. Recalling tales of time and space where a sudden, violent shock serves as the catalyst for a jump, he begins to fixate on the idea of a physical trigger. Whether it be the impact of a speeding vehicle or some other traumatic force, the concept takes root in his mind. Standing at the edge of the rooftop, Oda looks down at the ground far below, the wind whipping past him with a hollow roar. Up until this moment, the sheer terror of the act had kept him paralyzed, but the pain of his current reality has finally outweighed his fear of the fall. The young man steadies his breathing, his foot inching closer to the precipice as sweat beads on his forehead. He tells himself that this is no time for cowardice. The stakes are far too high to let a moment of hesitation ruin his only chance. With a final, desperate plea whispered to the air, he launches himself into the void. The world becomes a blur of gray sky and rushing wind as he surrenders his body to gravity. He hurtles through the branches of the trees below, the sound of snapping wood and rustling leaves punctuating his violent descent before he hits the earth with a sickening thud. Nearby, Keed and her friends are frozen in shock, staring at the broken figure that has suddenly shattered the peace of their afternoon. He had plummeted from the roof, leaving a wake of terror and confusion behind him. Shouts of alarm echoed through the school grounds as witnesses scrambled to find a teacher, their voices thick with the shock of seeing a student fall. Instead of the reset he craved, he found himself confined to a sterile hospital bed. The attempt had failed to trigger the loop, resulting only in a massive commotion that brought his friends and school staff to his bedside, their faces etched with worry and confusion. The aftermath was a blur of reprimands and relief. While his teachers lectured him sternly for his reckless actions, he could only focus on the bitter irony of his survival. He had escaped with nothing more than minor bandages, yet his spirit remained trapped in a reality he couldn't escape. A full week drifted by in a haze of resignation. By the night of Tuesday, May 20th, he sat alone in his room, the glow of his phone illuminating a face weary from failed attempts and the crushing weight of a future he didn't want to face. He stared at the screen, where a digital memory of happier times mocked his current despair. The thought of simply accepting this broken timeline and continuing to live a lie began to take root, a surrender born of pure exhaustion. With a heavy sigh, he tossed the device aside. It bounced softly on the mattress, the screen still displaying the date and time as if to remind him that the world would keep turning regardless of his grief. He slumped onto the edge of the bed, burying his face in his hands. The internal conflict was agonizing. He felt forced to make a choice he wasn't ready for, caught between the desire to change the past and the terrifying reality of the present. Outside, the moon hung cold and indifferent over the city. He wept quietly in the dark, the sound of his own sobs punctuating the realization that no matter how much he suffered or complained, the sun would inevitably rise on a new day he wasn't prepared to meet. The morning light eventually filtered through the window, accompanied by the persistent chirping of his alarm. He sat up slowly, his eyes wide with a sudden, jarring confusion as he reached for the phone that had been his only companion through the long night. There, frozen in time, were three friends in summer festival attire. Their smiles were a painful reminder of the bond he was so desperately trying to save, a silent testament to the stakes of his ongoing struggle. He stares down at the glowing screen of his phone, where the date and time are frozen in a moment he knows all too well, Wednesday, May 14th, at 7 in the morning. The wallpaper, a nostalgic image of three children in summer yukatas, serves as a cruel backdrop to the impossible reality displayed above it. Seeing the date triggers a wave of pure shock, his eyes widening as the realization hits him like a physical blow. He gasps, his mind racing with the horrifying truth that he has been pulled back into another loop. And of all the days to relive, it had to be this one, the day of his failed confession. Oda sits alone in the heavy silence of his room, the morning light filtering through the window as he stares intently at the device in his hand. He looks down at the screen, which displays the date, Wednesday, May 14th, at 7 in the morning. A photo of him with Himawari and Tsubaki serves as a painful reminder of a past he thought he had moved beyond. He had confessed his feelings to Himawari, believing that act would finally break the cycle he was trapped in. Yet here he is, back at the beginning. Because of this realization, his jaw tightens and he grinds his teeth in frustration. The crushing weight of the situation settles in. The loop has not ended, and everything is starting once more. The young man suddenly stands, the bed creaking under the sudden movement as he tries to suppress the rising panic. He knows that losing his cool will achieve nothing, and he forces himself to stand still and breathe, questioning why this is happening again. He stares at the phone again, his face beaded with sweat and his expression twisted in a mix of desperation and focus. He commands himself to think, to find a way out of this recurring nightmare. In the darkness of his own mind, he acknowledges the gravity of the situation. Now that the circumstances have shifted, he must determine his first move with absolute precision. Later, at school, the familiar chime of the bells rings through the halls as students go about their day. Tsubaki spots him in the corridor and raises a hand in a casual greeting, calling out a simple yo. The two friends stand together, but Oda's mind is elsewhere. He realizes that he must take the initiative this time, noting that he hadn't reached out to Tsubaki at all during the previous iteration of the week. He understands that if he doesn't change his actions, the outcome will remain the same. He notices a change in his friend's demeanor, wondering if the other boy seems unusually downcast compared to his usual energetic self. Approaching him with a hesitant call, he catches the taller boy's attention, who responds with a mix of surprise and mild confusion at being sought out. Standing together in the quiet school corridor, the spiky-haired youth questions the timing of this meeting, wondering why he's being summoned at such a moment when classes are in session. The conversation shifts to the recent confession, as the taller boy assumes his friend should be spending every waking moment with the girl he loves instead of loitering in the halls with him. With a pained expression, the dark-haired student finally admits the truth. He was rejected, a revelation that leaves his companion utterly speechless and wide-eyed with shock. Disbelief colors the air as the spiky-haired boy struggles to process the news, while his friend explains the misunderstanding that led him to believe the two of them were already a couple. He remains adamant, insisting that there is simply no way she could have turned down such a sincere confession, given how close they seem. A sudden realization strikes the dark-haired boy as he looks back on the previous week. He finally understands that his friend's distant behavior was a misguided attempt to give him and the girl space. The taller boy dismisses the notion, claiming his friend has always had an inflated opinion of him, even as the other desperately tries to argue that his kindness was genuine. Fueled by a sudden surge of protective anger, the spiky-haired youth storms off, determined to demand an explanation from the girl, leaving his friend trailing behind in a frantic attempt to hold him back. He is visibly agitated, unable to fathom why someone would reject a person like his friend. Turning his head, he calls out to the boy standing beside him, his voice laced with frustration over the situation. His gaze narrows as he shifts the conversation, questioning if his companion has always possessed this particular trait of self-deprecation. Continuing his line of questioning, he wonders aloud why such a remarkable person would bother acknowledging someone like himself, whom he views as having no real redeeming qualities or talents. He seems genuinely perplexed by the high regard in which he is held. With a heavy sigh, he remarks on his friend's lack of self-awareness as they walk together through the quiet school grounds, the distance between them reflecting the weight of the conversation. The other boy stops in his tracks, looking him dead in the eye to declare that his entire current self, his drive, and his character, is a direct result of his influence. This sudden admission leaves him momentarily speechless, his eyes widening in genuine shock at the depth of his friend's gratitude. His friend elaborates, recalling how he was the one who taught him to study and play sports back when he was just a small, sensitive child who felt he couldn't do anything right. He credits those early years of encouragement as the foundation of his growth. Reflecting on these words, the boy admits that while he often overthinks and doubts himself, there might be some truth to the observation that he has changed for the better. He goes on to explain that he always saw the inherent goodness in his friend's character and believed in his potential to excel in all things, regardless of how his friend viewed himself. Finally, he drops a bombshell, confessing with a somber expression that he was actually aware of the girl's feelings for him all along, leaving his companion in a state of stunned silence. He stands beside his childhood friend in a memory of their younger days, listening as the boy acknowledges that the person he has become, the one who captured Himawari's heart, is a direct result of his friend's influence and guidance. Because of this admission, the spiky-haired youth looks away, his gaze heavy as he remarks that Himawari has overlooked the most important detail of all. With a sudden, firm smack to the chest, he tells his friend that the same sentiment applies to him, forcing a moment of physical and emotional connection. The wind rushes past, carrying the weight of the unspoken as he calls out his friend's name one last time before departing. Elsewhere, the girl with the pale hair huddles deep within her hoodie, letting out a long, weary sigh before being startled by the cheerful arrival of her classmate, Ki. Seeing her friend's distress, the dark-haired girl playfully teases her, asking if things are going poorly with her supposed boyfriend, which sends the smaller girl into a flustered panic of denials. She attempts to clarify the situation regarding Tsubaki, but her words falter as they stand in the quiet school corridor. In response, the older girl tilts her head, realizing there has been a misunderstanding. She clarifies that she was referring to Oda, whom she views as a sort of matchmaker or Cupid in their social circle. This revelation leaves her stunned, her eyes wide with a sudden, jarring realization that the way others perceive her relationships is fundamentally different from her own memories. Outside classroom 3B, a sense of confusion hangs in the air as an unexpected revelation from Keed ripples through the quiet hallway. Inside the corridor, Himawari stands frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief as she struggles to process the claim that Oda is her boyfriend. She remains stunned, her mind racing to reconcile this information with her own memories, while Keed looks back with a casual, almost dismissive curiosity, wondering if she had somehow misremembered the details herself. As they continue their conversation, Keed appears genuinely certain of her facts, leaving Himawari to grapple with the realization that no one had ever mentioned such a relationship to her before, and the reality of the situation seems fundamentally different from what she believed. Desperate for clarity, the girl reaches out and firmly grips Keed's sleeve, her voice trembling as she tries to stop her from leaving. With a look of intense pleading, she begs for more information, needing to understand the source of this conflicting narrative. Later, the two find a quiet spot on a bench outside the school building, where Himawari begins to explain her side of the story while Keed listens intently, acknowledging the complexity of the situation. While Keed privately notes the stark difference in their memories and wonders what caused such a divergence, Himawari is overcome with guilt for Tsubaki, finding it difficult to even imagine facing him. She recoils, her face flushing a deep crimson as the other girl leans in with a knowing, almost teasing proximity. Keed dismisses her own importance as an outsider, yet pointedly asks why such intense worry is necessary. Confused by the line of questioning, she finds her mind drifting to a memory of a younger, more vibrant version of the boy, standing on a soccer field under a bright sun. Keed suggests that the image of the boy she helped mold might not be the person she was truly observing. The older girl's gaze softens, her eyes reflecting a quiet intensity as she poses a question that hangs heavy in the air. challenging the very foundation of the younger girl's perceptions. She stands frozen, the words echoing in her mind like a physical blow. The realization that she might have been viewing him solely through the lens of his current self, rather than who he truly was, leaves her breathless. As the conversation ends, she is left alone with her swirling thoughts while the other girl departs, eventually finding a quiet spot to sit and watch the leaves dance in the wind, lost in her own contemplation. High above, the sky is a vast expanse of gray and white, where stray leaves are caught in a sudden gust, drifting aimlessly past the dark silhouette of tree branches. Elsewhere, he sinks to the ground against the cold school wall, a heavy sigh of exhaustion escaping his lips as he finally allows his body to go limp. He remains lost in thought, reflecting on his own self-worth and the words that have been spoken to him. The idea that his own lack of self-esteem might be a crucial piece of a larger puzzle begins to take root. His introspection is abruptly shattered by a familiar voice calling out to him. Looking up, he sees the girl standing nearby, having tracked him down to his secluded spot. She stands over him with a playful, confident air, her hands resting on her hips. She challenges him on whether he even knows the proper way to write her name, hinting at a familiarity that should exist if they had truly known each other for as long as she claims. She approaches him with a confident stride, her footsteps echoing in the hallway. As she nears the boy sitting on the floor, she teases him, suggesting he doesn't seem like the type to go scouting for girls in other classes, effectively turning his own line back on him. He stares up at her, a look of profound confusion crossing his face. Internally, he struggles to reconcile the reality that this is their first meeting with the overwhelming sensation that he has known her for an eternity. A knowing smile plays across her lips as she observes his reaction. She decides to press him further, throwing his own unspoken questions right back at him to see how he will respond. Leaning in close, she bridges the distance between them until their faces are mere inches apart. The sudden proximity leaves him breathless, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and growing nervousness. She scrutinizes him with a sharp, discerning gaze, her expression shifting to one of intense curiosity. She states plainly that there is something unusual about him, sensing a hidden depth or secret beneath his flustered exterior. As they sit together in the quiet corridor, she reflects on his unique presence. To her, he seems fundamentally different from everyone else, and she wonders if she might share that same sense of displacement. With a sudden, energetic movement, she shifts her position, her mind racing through the inconsistencies she has noticed. She mentions the stories she heard from Himawari, noting that the current reality doesn't align with the fragments of memory she holds, a discrepancy that has been gnawing at her. In a bold, physical display of her intent, she pins him against the floor, the impact echoing through the hall. Leaning down to his ear, she whispers a confession of her interest in him, her voice low and provocative. He is completely overwhelmed, his face flushed and his thoughts spinning in a dizzying whirl. She doesn't let up, demanding that he finally explain the strange circumstances surrounding them. Her gaze remains fixed on him, her expression a complex blend of intensity and allure. She begins to voice a realization about the nature of their shared experience, hinting at a deeper connection between their fractured memories. She remains the center of this unfolding mystery as the school building stands silent under a vast, leaf-strewn sky. "A loop," she states, the words hanging heavy in the air between them. He confirms her suspicion with a simple, solemn nod. Her gaze sharpens, her eye widening as the gravity of the situation truly begins to sink in. As they sit together on the grass, she elaborates on the impossible truth. Both of them have been trapped, repeating the same specific window of time over and over again. She considers the discrepancy in their experiences, noting that while he remembers the events of the previous week with perfect clarity, her own recollections of that time are nothing but a vague, indistinct blur. Bouncing slightly with a strange sort of energy, she points out the logical conclusion that they must be caught in entirely different cycles of this temporal phenomenon. She seems almost amused by the revelation, admitting that she has absolutely no memory of the countless times they supposedly shared tea together. He watches her, a wave of realization washing over him. If she truly doesn't remember that week, then his silence during their first encounter might have been a mistake, and he wonders if he should have been honest from the very beginning. The weight of their differing timelines settles on him, making him realize that for her, the week that defined his struggle simply never occurred. She notices his sudden shift in mood, her expression softening as she calls out to him. Looking at him with newfound empathy, she realizes the burden he has been carrying, acknowledging that he has been trapped in this cycle of worry and suffering entirely on his own. She looks at him with an intensity that catches him off guard, her presence filling his vision as he struggles to process her revelation. As they sit together on the ground, he confirms that Tsurugi is indeed not part of the cycle, while she recalls having mentioned the previous week's loop to him already. A sudden, radiant joy washes over her, and she beams with a sparkling enthusiasm, realizing that this shared secret makes her unique in his world. Reaching out, she firmly grasps his hand, her expression softening as she declares herself the only person capable of truly understanding the burden he carries. Her fingers slide against his, a deliberate and intimate gesture that bridges the distance between them. With a playful yet deeply affectionate smile, she leans in close, her eyes shimmering as she proclaims herself to be his one and only companion in this endless loop. He remains frozen, his face flushing a deep crimson as the weight of her words and the warmth of her touch sink in. She continues, noting that in her memories, Tsurugi and Himawari only began dating because of his intervention, and she acknowledges the immense effort he has put into trying to break their temporal prison. A small, genuine smile finally touches his lips, a rare moment of comfort amidst the exhaustion of his repeated lives. He admits to his role in bringing their friends together, prompting her to look at him with newfound empathy, softly questioning just how much he has suffered on his own. She observes him closely, noting that his expression betrays his inner turmoil. With a gentle touch on his hand, she reminds him that companions exist to share such burdens, her gaze steady and supportive. Squeezing his hand firmly, she emphasizes that there is a limit to what one person can endure in isolation. He looks down, unable to find the words to counter her logic as the weight of his solitary journey begins to crack. She admits that her own memories of the loops are fragmented and hazy, sparing her the full extent of the suffering he has endured. Despite this, her resolve is clear. She wants them to find a way out of this cycle together. Because of her earnest proposal, he tentatively asks if she is suggesting they cooperate as partners. She agrees enthusiastically, her playful tone returning as they stand outside the school building. Suddenly, she reaches out and gives his sleeve a sharp tug, pulling him toward her. Wrapping her arms around his neck in a bold, intimate embrace, she leans in close and asks if he would like to try dating her. Stunned by the sudden shift in the conversation, he can only stare at her, his face flushing a deep red as his mind struggles to process the unexpected proposition. Seeing his genuine confusion, she breaks into a light-hearted laugh, finding his flustered reaction endearing while he remains frozen in shock. Later, as they sit together on the grass near the school wall, she brings up his recent rejection by Himawari, noting his desire to return to a time before that painful confession. He sighs, admitting that she has seen right through him. Seizing the moment, she leans in once more with a mischievous glint in her eyes, suggesting that if he wants to move on, he should simply go out with her instead. He is left baffled by her leap in logic, even as her presence becomes increasingly impossible to ignore. She reaches out, poking his cheek with a playful yet insistent finger, ignoring his wince of discomfort. Her logic is relentless. Since they are trapped in a loop with unknown conditions for its start or end, she argues they have no choice but to experiment with actions they would never consider under normal circumstances. Because of this radical conclusion, she declares the matter settled with a cheerful finality, even addressing him with an affectionate pet name that leaves him stammering in shock. He tries to interject, his voice cracking as he pleads for her to wait, but the momentum of her decision seems unstoppable. Sensing his hesitation, the young woman shifts her approach, leaning back on the grass with a look of feigned hurt, questioning if she simply isn't good enough for him. She lists her own merits with a mix of confidence and vulnerability, noting that she considers herself quite attractive and has always been popular with others. A soft, knowing smile plays across her lips as she absorbs his silence, her voice dropping to a whisper as she acknowledges his lack of an immediate rebuttal. In response to his continued stunned silence, she pouts, turning her head away slightly while suggesting that perhaps she just isn't his type. This sends him into a frantic panic, his hands waving dismissively as he desperately tries to clarify that his hesitation isn't due to a lack of attraction. The girl turns back to him, her gaze sharpening as she demands to know the real reason for his reluctance if it isn't a matter of preference. The boy looks away, his face flushing a deep crimson as he finally admits to himself that she is, in fact, incredibly attractive. Despite this admission, he remains plagued by doubt, questioning why someone as remarkable as her would ever choose a plain, unremarkable person like himself, even considering their bizarre situation. She can't help but giggle at his stiff, overly formal way of speaking, the tension breaking for a brief moment. As they sit together in the quiet shade of the trees, she reassures him, her voice softening as she insists that he is anything but plain. With a radiant smile and her arms spread wide in a gesture of total openness, she declares that in all her life, she has never encountered anyone quite like him. She continues her line of reasoning, observing that since he can keep up with her rapid-fire thoughts, their minds must operate at a similar frequency. He offers a quiet, uncertain agreement, his voice barely rising above the rustle of the leaves in the breeze. Standing together beneath the school building's shadow, she reiterates her joy, telling him that having him as a companion is more than enough to make her happy. The simple honesty of her words hangs in the air between them. Her expression softens into a radiant, blushing smile as she confesses that her happiness is so profound she might truly come to like him, a statement that leaves him wide-eyed and breathless with shock. He stands frozen, his face flushing a deep crimson as the weight of her praise sinks in. It is a sensation entirely foreign to him, causing his heart to hammer against his ribs in a frantic, unfamiliar rhythm that he cannot ignore. Seeing his reaction, she tilts her head with a playful, expectant look, asking if he is ready to take the leap and begin their experimental relationship right then and there. He gives a hesitant, stuttering affirmation, acknowledging that they must act if they hope to change their circumstances, which prompts a burst of pure, sparkling excitement from her as she celebrates the decision. In a moment of surprising formality, they both drop to their knees on the grass, exchanging polite bows as they pledge to support one another and get along from this day forward. As they stand to leave, she reaches out, her fingers catching the fabric of his sleeve in a gentle but firm tug, anchoring him to her side. She then pulls herself close, clinging to his arm with a cheerful declaration that their new life together has officially begun, leaving him flustered and struggling to keep his composure as they walk. However, this display of affection does not go unnoticed. As a silent observer watches from the periphery, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning heartbreak at the sight of them together. She watches them go, her heart heavy with a self-imposed silence. She reminds herself that she was the one who turned Tsubaki away when he confessed his feelings, and because of that choice, she believes she has no right to voice any objection to who he chooses to be with now. As the distance between them grows, she feels an overwhelming weight pressing down on her chest. The isolation of the moment amplifies her confusion, leaving her to wonder why the sight of them together causes such a profound, physical ache. Suddenly, a sharp intake of breath escapes her as a strange sensation ripples through the air. Petals drift past her face, but her eyes widen with a sudden, inexplicable realization that something is wrong. The world around her blurs and tears away, replaced by a jarring, sterile vision of a hospital room. The rhythmic whoosh of machinery fills her ears as she catches a fleeting glimpse of an IV drip and a ceiling she shouldn't be seeing, her own eye reflecting a reality far removed from the school grounds. Just as quickly as it appeared, the vision vanishes, leaving her blinking in the sunlight. She utters a soft sound of confusion, her mind racing to make sense of the impossible image that just flashed before her eyes. The transition leaves her reeling, her gaze darting between the retreating figures of her friends and the familiar architecture of the school. She turns her head sharply, searching for the source of the disturbance, but the only thing that remains is the lingering, ghostly sound of that rushing wind. Standing alone on the path, she trembles, struggling to process the fragmented memory that felt more like a premonition. It seems that the shifting tides of time are no longer affecting just the protagonist. Her own past is beginning to fracture and reform in ways she cannot yet comprehend. Tsubaki stands frozen in the school walkway, his voice trembling as he struggles to process the sight before him. He can barely find the words, his eyes wide with disbelief as he points toward his friends. Beside him, Keed beams with joy, her arm linked tightly with Oda's as she confirms the shocking news that they have officially begun dating. Oda remains silent, his expression unreadable as the weight of the situation settles over them. The revelation sends Tsubaki into a frenzy of confusion, his voice rising as he demands an explanation for this sudden shift. Oda calmly counters, reminding him of their previous discussions regarding the time loop and Himawari's involvement in the phenomena. Standing his ground, the boy further clarifies the situation, identifying Keed not just as a partner, but as another individual caught within the same temporal cycle, a fellow loop companion. He looks away, his gaze falling to the ground as he begins to explain the deeper complexities of their predicament. Tsubaki can only stare, his mind racing to keep up with the mounting revelations. The truth becomes even more dire as Oda confesses that he has entered yet another loop, a cycle where Himawari's unwavering feelings remain a constant, haunting presence. Tsubaki recoils, the sheer impossibility of the situation leaving him breathless. Despite the outward calm he tries to maintain, his hand tightens into a white-knuckled grip on his sleeve. He is trapped, and without any clear path to breaking the cycle, the weight of the endless repetition begins to take its toll. He stands before Tsubaki, listening as his friend acknowledges the unique circumstances they now share. Tsubaki emphasizes that this path is only possible because they are together, urging him to venture into the unknown and attempt things he has never dared before. After a heavy sigh of resignation, the spiky-haired youth accepts the reality of the situation, prompting a quiet word of thanks from Oda. He places a hand over his heart, wanting his friend to truly understand his gratitude, even as Tsubaki tries to brush off the weight of the moment. Sensing the potential for a misunderstanding, he quickly clarifies that his support isn't quite what it seems, stammering that he isn't necessarily cheering them on in the way they might think. He looks away, his expression unreadable, while Oda offers a soft, reassuring smile, telling him that everything is fine. Watching the exchange, Keed realizes that Tsubaki holds a significant place in Oda's heart, a bond that rivals his connection to Himawari. As they stand together in the schoolyard, he ponders if there is some hidden key within their current circumstances that they have yet to discover. Nearby, a sudden gust of wind catches Keed's long hair, the tresses dancing in the air as she remains lost in her own thoughts. She stands momentarily apart, bathed in a bright, ethereal light that separates her from the two boys continuing their conversation in the distance. The school bell eventually signals the end of the day, echoing through the halls of Class 3C. When his classmates invite him to join them, Oda politely declines, his mind clearly occupied as he gathers his things and prepares to leave the room. While walking through the crowded corridor, he is suddenly stopped in his tracks by a familiar, melodic voice calling out his name. It is Keed, standing there with a bright, cheerful wave, announcing to the entire hallway that she has come to pick him up. Her sudden appearance draws the immediate attention of the surrounding students, who whisper in awe of the beautiful girl from Class B. Without hesitation, she reaches out and firmly grabs his arm, leading him away under the stunned gazes of his peers. The sight leaves the other students, including the boy with glasses, reeling with questions about the nature of the relationship between the quiet Oda and the popular girl. Keed stands boldly before the class, her arm linked tightly with Oda's as she announces their new relationship status to everyone. The news hits their friends like a physical blow. Tsubaki's jaw drops in utter shock, while Himawari and the others stare in wide-eyed disbelief at the sudden, public revelation. Before anyone can process the news, she begins pulling him away, waving a cheerful farewell to the stunned group. Tsubaki finally finds his voice, shouting out in protest as he watches his friend being led off by the assertive girl. As they disappear down the hallway, she remains behind, her expression shifting from shock to a quiet, contemplative curiosity. She watches the empty space where they stood, her mind clearly racing with questions about this sudden development. While she watches from afar, he finally manages to voice his embarrassment, questioning why she felt the need to make such a public spectacle of their private arrangement. He walks beside her, his shoulders hunched as he tries to reconcile his discomfort with her unwavering confidence. She responds with a playful, almost predatory smile, admitting that her public claim was a calculated move to ward off any potential rivals. Her eyes sparkle with a mix of mischief and genuine affection as she watches the blush deepen on his cheeks. Clinging tighter to his arm, she softens her tone, explaining that despite the specific goals and circumstances that brought them together, her feelings for him are undeniably real. She looks up at him, her gaze steady as she reaffirms that he has become someone truly special in her life. The physical contact intensifies as she gives his arm a firm, possessive squeeze, leaving him momentarily breathless and overwhelmed by her proximity. The air between them is thick with a new, undeniable tension that he is still struggling to navigate. Looking up at the bright, open sky, she enthusiastically suggests that they should lean into their new roles and continue engaging in all the typical activities expected of a couple. Her voice is light, filled with an optimism that contrasts sharply with his lingering uncertainty. They continue their walk, passing by the bright lights of a game center as the reality of their situation begins to truly sink in. This moment marks the official commencement of a journey neither of them fully understands yet. Posing together for a moment that feels like a captured memory, she flashes a peace sign and a wink, embodying the spirit of their new bond. It is the start of a relationship built on trial and error, a path they are now committed to walking together. He finds himself swept up in her infectious energy as they look over the printed photos from the booth. She beams with delight, pointing out how they struck the same pose in every shot. While he can only stare at the images, his face heating up at the sight of their closeness. This pattern continues throughout the day, with his time becoming a whirlwind of her spontaneous whims. From trying on clothes in brightly lit boutiques to sharing a meal where she playfully offers him a bite of her burger, she leads the way with an effortless grace that leaves him perpetually off balance. As they stroll past the neon lights of a karaoke bar, the sounds of laughter and music spilling into the street, he observes her profile. She seems genuinely happy, a realization that makes him wonder if this trial relationship is more than just a series of calculated moves for her. The quiet moment is shattered when she suddenly calls out to Tsubaki, her voice bright and clear. He jolts in surprise, his eyes widening as he realizes they've run into someone they know, the sudden shift in focus catching him completely off guard. Turning back to him, she continues their conversation with a playful glint in her eye, urging him to join in. He stammers, his own name feeling heavy on his tongue as he tries to keep up with her rapid-fire pace. She doesn't slow down, gesturing emphatically as they walk through the crowded shopping district. She argues that since they've committed to this experiment, they should approach it with sincerity, treating their time together as a real bond rather than a mere formality. Stopping in her tracks, she points a finger toward him, her expression softening into a mischievous smile. She suggests that they should both make an effort to actually enjoy the relationship, a proposal that leaves him speechless and blushing under her direct gaze. Before he can formulate a response, she grabs his hand and pulls him forward, her enthusiasm undiminished. He follows, his mind racing as he admits to himself that he had never considered the possibility of simply enjoying their arrangement. Suddenly, she spins him around and presses him against a nearby wall with a firm thud, her face inches from his. The world seems to shrink down to just the two of them, his heart hammering against his ribs as he stares at her in stunned silence. The intimate moment is interrupted by the sounds of the city around them, including a child nearby who points and shouts to their mother about the scene. He stands frozen, acutely aware of the public spectacle they've become as the reality of her bold gesture sinks in. He feels her hand slide around his neck, a bold and intimate gesture that catches him completely off guard. Looking down at him with a playful yet intense gaze, she asks what name he will use for her, specifically questioning if he will address her as he does Tsubaki. The young man falters, his breath hitching as he begins to utter a name, the first syllable catching in his throat as he struggles to find the right words. Before he can finish, she pulls him into a close embrace, humming with satisfaction as he finally manages to say her name, Heed, acknowledging the shift in their dynamic. With the tension momentarily broken, she leads the way forward, her energy undiminished as she announces their next destination and urges him to keep up. She pauses for a moment, glancing back with a softer, more contemplative expression to offer a brief apology for her assertive behavior earlier. He remains flustered, his hand instinctively covering his face as he realizes that, far from being bothered by her forwardness, he is actually starting to feel comfortable in her presence. As they walk beneath the open sky, he reflects on how close he came to speaking his thoughts aloud, grateful that he managed to restrain himself at the last second before revealing too much. He quietly acknowledges her words, while she enthusiastically suggests they take a break at a nearby family restaurant, her mood shifting back to one of cheerful excitement. With a mutual agreement reached, the pair continues their journey through the city streets, heading toward their next stop as the day begins to wind down. He walks stiffly, his face flushed a deep crimson as Keed clings tightly to his arm. She leans in close, her voice a soft murmur as she seizes the opportunity to speak her mind while they are alone. He is caught off guard when she boldly asks if the sensation of her chest pressing against him is a distraction. He stammers in response, his eyes wide with embarrassment as he reminds her that he is, after all, a young man. He can only offer a defeated, nervous laugh as she offers a playful smile, confessing that she actually wants him to be aware of her presence in that way. He realizes he is completely outmatched by her forwardness. She remains rooted to the spot moments later, her gaze fixed on their retreating figures as they disappear down the street together. She is left deeply unsettled by the sight, her hand moving to her face as she processes the realization that Oda has lowered his guard around Keed in a way she never expected. It feels as if a switch has been flipped inside him, making him more vulnerable to her influence. She tries to shake off the sharp pang of distress that follows, insisting to herself that she has no reason to be upset, even as her chest feels increasingly tangled and heavy. She reaches a breaking point in her internal struggle, her face flushing with heat as a silent, desperate cry against this new reality echoes in her mind. The sight of them together is becoming unbearable. She finally admits the truth to herself while standing alone in the street. The thought of him dating Keed is something she simply cannot accept, and she refuses to let things continue this way. He reflects on the danger of the previous evening the next morning at school, letting out a weary sigh as he walks through the quiet corridors. The encounter has clearly left a lasting impression on him. He reflects on the growing intensity of his emotions, fearing that he might lose himself if he allows his feelings to develop any further. Steeling his resolve, the young man decides that today he will maintain his composure around his companion. As he walks down the school corridor, he spots her and offers a casual greeting. He continues his approach, casually using her first name as he asks what their plans are for the afternoon. The girl stops in her tracks, her expression one of genuine bewilderment as she questions why he is suddenly being so familiar with her. Stunned by her reaction, he can only stare back, his mind racing to understand the sudden shift in her demeanor. She presses further, acting as if their previous intimacy never happened, while he desperately reminds her of her own words regarding their relationship. A heavy silence falls between them as he struggles to process her apparent memory loss or sudden change of heart. With a dismissive toss of her hair, she laughs off his words as a clumsy attempt at flirting, firmly re-establishing a formal distance by addressing him by his surname. She then turns and walks away with a cheerful wave, leaving him frozen in the hallway under the watchful, wide-eyed gaze of another student. This witness stands paralyzed, her hands clasped to her chest, as she tries to make sense of the cold rejection she just observed. She stands frozen, her hands clutching her face in a state of utter bewilderment. Her mind races with frantic questions, unable to comprehend the reality unfolding before her eyes as the world seems to blur around her. Peering through the gaps in her fingers, she is struck by a sudden, blinding realization as her wide, trembling eye reflects a terrifying truth. This chaotic turn of events is precisely what she had envisioned. This chilling epiphany crystallizes in the darkness of her thoughts, confirming that this was the very outcome she had desired just the day before, and suggesting she may be the catalyst for the temporal loop itself. Tsubaki stands before Oda, his hands raised in a gesture for him to stop. The school bell chimes in the distance as he tries to process the staggering information he's just received, asking for a moment to get the facts straight. He remains calm, his gaze steady as he confirms the reality of their situation. He explains that the same week has been repeating itself, a cycle he has lived through countless times. As they walk along the school perimeter, the friend recounts the details shared. He notes that by the 10th iteration, the boy had attempted to change the outcome by bringing Tsubaki and Himawari together for a decisive action, yet the loop persisted. He continues his explanation, detailing a moment where he managed to break the cycle, only to confess his feelings to Himawari and face rejection. To his dismay, the loop reset once more, but under different circumstances than before. In this new iteration, he found himself in a relationship with Keed, who he discovered was also trapped in the temporal loop. It was her suggestion that they date, and for a time, things seemed to be progressing well. However, a sudden shift occurred. He recalls Keed's warm smile, a stark contrast to the cold reality he faced that morning when she seemingly lost all memory of their shared experiences. His expression darkens with a sense of profound loss. He describes the chilling moment she spoke to him as if they were complete strangers, erasing the bond they had built. Tsubaki considers this new variable, wondering if their individual loop cycles are out of sync. He suggests the possibility that Keed has been pulled back to a point in time before their paths ever crossed. He remains nearby as she acknowledges the possibility of the desynchronized loop, her expression grave as she admits such things have happened before. Oda remains silent, his gaze fixed on the floor as the weight of her words settles over them. As the conversation continues, a strange sensation begins to gnaw at him, a deep-seated feeling of wrongness that causes him to tighten his grip on the fabric of his uniform right over his heart. The timing of everything feels far too calculated, occurring precisely as his feelings for her were beginning to take root. A realization that leaves him clutching his head in frustration while memories of Himawari and Keed flicker through his mind. He stares blankly ahead, the cruelty of the situation becoming undeniable as he pieces together the implications of their fractured timeline. A cold sweat breaks out on his brow as the suspicion grows that the timing of her loop reset is almost too perfectly convenient to be a mere coincidence, fueling his growing sense of unease. While he is lost in these dark ruminations, a hand reaches out toward him, and a familiar voice breaks through the fog of his thoughts, asking if he is alright. The energetic youth reminds him that he is effectively single again, noting how awkward things must still be between him and Himawari after the confession that the reset has now rendered moot. Looking out over the quiet school grounds, he can only offer a quiet, weary agreement, acknowledging that their current predicament is exactly as messy as it seems. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out his phone, the screen illuminating a cheerful photo of himself, Himawari, and their friend in summer festival attire, a stark contrast to the date displayed, Tuesday, May 20th. Walking alongside his companion, he contemplates the uncertainty of the coming night, knowing that sleep might either return him to the 14th or, by some slim chance, finally allow him to escape the cycle entirely. He stands in stunned silence as Tsubaki suggests a way forward, reconciling with Himawari. The suggestion catches him off guard, leaving him to wonder if such a thing is even possible now. Sensing his friend's hesitation, the white-haired boy offers a reassuring pat on the shoulder, admitting that seeing him so cornered and depressed is more than he can bear to watch. As the school clock ticks past noon, Himawari waits nearby, her expression a mix of anxiety and anticipation for a meeting that hasn't happened in quite some time. The dark-haired boy watches her from a distance, his single visible eye reflecting a heavy internal conflict. Breaking the tension, Tsubaki arrives with a boisterous greeting, holding out snacks as a peace offering. He moves between them with practiced ease, announcing a three-way split of the food to force a shared moment of normalcy and bridge the gap between his two friends. Both of them accept the gesture with quiet, hesitant thanks, though the air between them remains thick with the weight of unspoken words and past regrets. They eventually settle onto the outdoor benches, a physical distance still separating the two as the protagonist reflects on how unusual it is for him to be the one being prodded into social interaction. A heavy silence falls over the group. Himawari steals a glance toward him, but he quickly looks away. He stares ahead, the realization sinking in that despite the effort to bridge the gap, the atmosphere remains painfully strained and awkward. He remains frozen in a heavy, suffocating silence that even the bright afternoon sun cannot pierce. Tsubaki, ever the optimist, claps his hands together with a sharp crack, desperately urging his friends to start their meal and break the tension. As the distant sounds of other students playing sports drift over the fence, he tries to steer them back to a simpler time. He suggests that for now, they should just enjoy each other's company as the trio they have always been, hoping to recapture their old rhythm. Turning his attention to the girl beside him, he insists she eat as she normally would, but the sudden attention causes her to jolt in surprise. Nearby, the dark-haired boy watches the exchange with a quiet, questioning gaze, sensing the friction in the air. He stands by the bench, reflecting on the palpable unease radiating from his childhood friend. While he expected her to feel some awkwardness toward him after everything that has happened, a new, unsettling realization begins to take root in his mind. She keeps her eyes cast downward, her face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and hesitation. It becomes clear to him that her discomfort isn't just directed at him. She seems equally, if not more, unsettled by the presence of the boy sitting across from her. Observing her closely, he notes that she is failing to act like her usual self. The most telling sign is the way she pointedly avoids making eye contact with the dark-haired boy, a stark departure from her typical warmth and openness. Himawari sits alone on a park bench, her head bowed in deep thought. The air around her feels heavy with an unspoken tension, as her behavior has become increasingly erratic and distant, particularly when it comes to her interactions with Oda. Suddenly, the silence is broken by the sound of approaching footsteps. Oda and Tsubaki find her there, and as Oda reaches out to address her, she lets out a startled cry, nearly jumping out of her skin at his sudden presence. He looks at her with a mixture of confusion and genuine concern, his brow furrowed as he asks if something has gone wrong. She can only offer a hesitant, stuttered response, her eyes wide and searching as she struggles to find her voice. Before she can explain, Tsubaki interjects, calling out to Oda with a sense of urgency. Oda turns his head, his expression shifting to one of bewilderment at the sudden change in the conversation's direction. The atmosphere grows even more strained as Tsubaki confronts her directly, questioning if her anxiety stems from something beyond their own complicated dynamic. She is visibly shaken by the accusation, her hands clenching the fabric of her skirt as she reels from the realization that her inner turmoil has been noticed. Stepping closer, Oda places his hands firmly on her shoulders, grounding her as she sits on the bench. He speaks with a quiet intensity, confessing that he has been paying close attention to her every move, much more than she might have realized. She gazes up at him, her breath catching in her throat as he draws a parallel to the way she used to observe him. The weight of his gaze is almost overwhelming, stripping away her defenses and leaving her feeling exposed. He calls her name softly, but the emotional pressure finally reaches its breaking point. Her eyes well up with tears, and her composure begins to crumble under the weight of the day's events. Finally, she can no longer hold it back, crying out that everything feels fundamentally wrong. Her hands are clasped to her chest as she stands, her face a mask of distress as she struggles to articulate the overwhelming sense of displacement that has taken hold of her. She stares blankly as the realization hits her friends. Tsubaki and Oda are frozen, processing the revelation that she had completely forgotten about his relationship with Keed until this very morning. Her mind races back to the previous day, recalling how events unfolded precisely as she had anticipated. Despite knowing she shouldn't feel this way, the intensity of her own resentment toward the situation had been overwhelming. Now, sitting slumped on a park bench, she confesses that the impossible has become reality today. The two boys stand before her, dwarfed by the weight of her admission. He can only stare, his single visible eye wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror at the implications of her words. Tears begin to well in her eyes as Tsubaki asks the painful question. Did she truly hate the fact that he and Keed were together? Her quiet affirmation leaves them both reeling. She admits through her tears that she doesn't even understand the root of her own hatred. Behind her, the boys are struck by the sheer irrationality and raw emotion of her confession. A tense silence follows, broken only by the rhythmic tapping of a shoe. Tsubaki tries to wrap his head around the logic, questioning if her dark wishes from the day before have somehow manifested into the present. Overcome with guilt, she suddenly drops into a deep, formal bow, her voice cracking as she offers a desperate apology. While remaining bowed, she pours out the truth. Despite being the one who originally rejected Tsubaki, seeing him with Keeds sparked a restless, obsessive jealousy that drove her to follow them in secret. In her desperation, she admits to the unthinkable, altering Keeds' very memories. The revelation leaves them breathless. As she trembles, Oda begins to wonder if she possesses some terrifying, latent ability that has rewritten their reality. She watched as the two boys grappled with the logic of their situation. Tsubaki argued that how one perceives things is merely a matter of perspective, a point that Oda found difficult to refute given the strange circumstances they were in. He considered this, realizing that from his own perspective, the concept of looping through time was essentially the same as what was happening. Since he hadn't experienced anything else, the repetition felt like his only reality. The girl tilted her head in confusion, questioning the meaning of a loop, while the young man's hand tightened into a fist. He came to a grim realization. If he accepted his own temporal displacement as truth, he had no choice but to acknowledge the validity of her strange abilities as well. He turned to her, finally putting his experience into words. He explained that he frequently found himself repeating the same week, retaining all his memories while the world around him reset, a phenomenon that had become a regular occurrence in his life. She gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief at his confession. When Tsubaki inquired if she felt any similar effects, she could only shake her head, confirming that she remained unaffected by whatever was warping his sense of time. The energetic youth looked down, a shadow crossing his face as he processed their revelations. Having heard both of their extraordinary stories, he felt a sudden, sharp pang of isolation. Realizing he was the only one in their trio who wasn't part of this supernatural mystery, he suddenly stiffened, a new thought striking him with such force that he told the others to stop staring. He insisted he wasn't a child anymore, and that their pity didn't bother him, though his defensive posture suggested otherwise. Standing before them in the quiet schoolyard, he posed a question that chilled the air. He asked if this exact moment, the three of them standing there, discussing these impossible things, hadn't actually happened once before. They both froze, the weight of his question sinking in. Oda let out a breathy confirmation, the feeling of déjà vu suddenly becoming an undeniable, physical weight in his chest. She stared into the distance, a faint, hazy memory beginning to surface from her childhood. She recalled a similar sensation from when she was in the 4th grade, though the specific details remained frustratingly out of reach, buried under years of forgotten time. She stands before them, the subject of their intense scrutiny, as Oda questions if she, of all people, surely remembers the truth of what occurred. Confusion washes over her face as she asks what they are even talking about, insisting she has no memory of such things, while the boys exchange a look of disbelief. Below them, the sound of footsteps on the gravel underscores the growing tension of their confrontation. The tension escalates as Oda's eye widens in a realization of dread. Tsubaki insists that if the two of them remember the event so clearly, there is no possible way she could have forgotten it entirely. Suddenly, she clutches her head as if struck by a physical blow, her face contorted in agony as she cries out that the memories simply aren't there, her voice strained with a desperate denial. Oda recoils, his own hand flying to his face as a wave of disorientation hits him, his mind reeling from her violent reaction and the sudden, sharp pain behind his eyes. The very fabric of reality begins to warp and buckle around them, the school building twisting into impossible shapes as Oda's vision fails and his legs give way beneath him. As the world dissolves into a swirling vortex of gray and white, Himawari's desperate cries for Tsubaki echo through the void, her voice the last thing Oda hears before the darkness takes him. Silence returns to the school grounds, the building standing tall and indifferent under a vast, cloud-streaked sky, as if the preceding chaos had never occurred. With a violent start, Oda bolts upright in his bed, the rhythmic, insistent chirping of an alarm clock shattering the remnants of a nightmare as he gasps for air. He stares blankly at the device, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he struggles to reconcile the vivid horror of the rooftop with the mundane reality of his bedroom, wondering what just happened. He stares at the screen in his hand, his eyes wide with a sudden, chilling realization. The device, which should have held the answers he sought, now only reflects his growing panic. Frantically tapping the glass, he searches for a contact that has vanished without a trace. A cold sensation creeps over him as he realizes the name, Himawari, is nowhere to be found, leaving him breathless with a sense of wrongness. Desperate for any connection to reality, he dials another number, and the line clicks open. He immediately blurts out her name, his voice trembling as he questions why his friend is calling so early in the morning. The response from the other end of the line is a crushing blow, as his friend asks a question that shatters his world. Who is Himawari? The silence that follows is heavy with the weight of a forgotten existence. Despite the digital erasure, a single image remains. A photograph of two children dressed in traditional summer attire, standing side by side in a memory that only he seems to possess. Driven by a frantic need to prove his own sanity, he throws on his uniform and bolts from the house. He races through the streets, his mind a whirlwind of confusion as he heads toward the one place where she should be. Every breath is a struggle as he pushes himself forward, the familiar surroundings of his neighborhood blurring past. He is consumed by the singular goal of finding her and undoing this nightmare. He finally reaches the school gates, the imposing building standing as a silent witness to his desperation. He makes his way toward the classroom, hoping against hope that the world inside remains unchanged. Inside the halls, he confronts his classmates, but their blank stares and confused questions only deepen his isolation. Heed and the others speak of the season and the sunflowers, treating the name, Himawari, as nothing more than a reference to a flower, completely unaware of the girl who should be standing among them. Even his closest companion reacts with a mixture of frustration and bewilderment, slamming his hand against the doorframe in a burst of irritation. He demands to know how Oda could possibly have forgotten Himawari, his words creating a jarring and inexplicable contradiction to his own earlier claims of ignorance. He insists with absolute certainty that she is their childhood friend, a bond shared by the three of them since they were small children. However, the boy with the dark bangs can only offer a hollow apology, his mind a complete blank regarding the girl his friend describes with such conviction. He is forced to confront a chilling reality. In this world, she simply does not exist. His friend, leaning against the window, reinforces this isolation by claiming they have only ever had each other since they were young, leaving no room for a third companion in their history. Unable to bear the weight of these conflicting memories, he turns and bolts, ignoring the confused shouts calling after him. Deep down, he refuses to let go, clinging to the internal realization that his memories are real and that their golden duo was always meant to be a trio. As he sprints through the school corridors, the world around him feels increasingly alien. He resolves that even if the entire world has erased her from existence and every other mind has forgotten her name, he will remain the sole keeper of her memory. His determination hardens into a desperate mission to find her, wherever she might be. He can still vividly recall the way the sunlight caught her translucent hair and the warmth of her gentle smile, details too precious to be mere figments of his imagination. Gasping for breath, he finds himself standing outside a familiar residential building, having fled the school grounds in a frantic haze. It has been years since he last set foot here, but it is the only place left where he might find a trace of the life he remembers. With a silent plea and a tightly clenched fist, he steps into the elevator. The mechanical hum of the ascent mirrors the racing of his heart as he prepares to face whatever, or whoever, waits for him on the floors above. Rushing out as the doors slide open, he scans the hallway, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and hope. Her name escapes his lips in a desperate cry, a final gamble against the void that has swallowed her. He stops before a specific door, the number 205 etched into his memory. Every fiber of his being is focused on the hope that she is behind this thin barrier, waiting to prove that his world hasn't completely shattered. Trembling, his finger reaches out toward the doorbell. He stands before the door, heart hammering against his ribs as the chime of the doorbell echoes through the quiet hallway. A moment of agonizing silence follows before a voice crackles through the intercom, questioning who is there. He hears a hopeful voice from the other end, tentatively asking if it is Tsukuan at the door. He freezes, the name catching him off guard, but he manages to stammer out a clumsy greeting as the lock clicks open. Once inside, he finds himself seated in a familiar living room while the woman prepares tea, her movements practiced and calm. She chides him gently for skipping school, noting with a soft smile how long it has been since his last visit. He cannot contain his desperation any longer, leaning forward to ask the one question that has been consuming him. Where is Himawari? The woman's expression falters, a flicker of confusion crossing her face as he insists that she must be there. Seeing his distress, she reaches out and takes his hands in hers, her touch warm and grounding. She offers a sad, knowing smile, thanking him for coming to see her after all this time, even when others might have moved on. She looks deeply into his eyes, her voice dropping to a soft whisper as she asks if he truly hasn't forgotten her. He struggles to find his voice, the weight of her gaze and the implications of her words pressing down on him. In response to his silence, she stands and suggests they go together, mentioning she was just about to head out herself. With a playful flick to his forehead, she dismisses his apologies for the truancy, her demeanor shifting to one of purposeful action. As they settle into her car, a profound sense of relief washes over him. The mere fact that she acknowledges Himawari is proof enough that his memories aren't a delusion. The world outside the window blurs as they pull away from the curb, heading toward an unknown destination. He watches her profile as she drives, his mind racing with the certainty that if someone else remembers, then Himawari's existence is undeniable. Yet, a lingering shadow of doubt remains, a silent, but that he can't quite shake. They eventually pull up to the imposing facade of Higashi University Hospital. She leads the way toward the entrance, calling out for him to follow, and he realizes with a jolt of apprehension that the answers he seeks lie within these sterile walls. He stands frozen at the threshold of the sterile hospital room, the rhythmic, mechanical chirping of a heart monitor cutting through the heavy silence. Beside him, the woman who led him here remains quiet as he stares at the figure reclining in the bed, his previous spark of hope instantly extinguished by the grim reality before him. The girl lies motionless, her face partially obscured by a clear plastic oxygen mask that fogs with every strained, rattling breath. Her eyes are tightly shut, and her skin appears pale against the white linens, the labored sound of her wheezing filling the small space with a sense of desperate struggle. As he processes the sight, a chilling realization takes hold. Despite the name and the circumstances, the person in that bed is fundamentally different from the girl he once knew. The world he thought he understood is fracturing further, leaving him to grapple with the terrifying question of what has truly happened to his reality.